many of you are familiar with this. Pardon me?
Go ahead, Tom.
Okay, I'm sorry. A bit of an overview of the program will be reviewed for some, but maybe new for others that are tuning in. Just describing a bit of the history and ins and outs of the program. Then I'll talk a bit more about a few priority areas, and I know we're going to hear much more about that from our upcoming speakers, especially from the federal side, but later in the day as well. And then I'll include a couple of example projects related to some of the priority areas, and then we'll have some time for questions at the end. And I'll mention too, just briefly, so my role is as National Coordinator. I serve as the staff to the Interagency Council, the CESU Council, comprised of the 15 federal agencies. That council is the governing body for the program, and my administrative location is in the National Park Service at headquarters in Washington, D.C. So what is the CESU network? I get this question, many of you maybe get this question, and it is, in short, a national consortium of federal agencies, tribes, academic institutions, state and local governments, non-governmental organizations, and other partners working to support informed public trust resource stewardship. The program now includes over 400 partners through 17 cooperative ecosystem study units, or CESUs, across the country that encompass all 50 states and U.S. territories. The program was authorized in 1998, so this is 20 years ago, by the 105th Congress, where they authorized the Secretary of the Interior to establish a network of multidisciplinary study units that could include a number of different partners to develop information products to inform decision making. The program has since evolved into its current state over the last 20 years, now with 15 federal agencies and over 420 non-federal partners. Just a brief nod to the establishment of the program. So, authorized in '98, one of the first tasks was to establish the CESU Council, and that was done through an interagency memorandum of understanding. The council then had the task to do several annual rounds of competition to create the network representing biogeographic regions across the country. So in this group, the Southeastern group, in each of these competition years, one of these CESUs was established. So in 1999, we had the Southern Appalachian Mountains come online. In 2000, the South Florida Caribbean CESU came online. In 2001, it was the Chesapeake Watershed. 2002, the Gulf Coast CESU came online. And then 2003, the Piedmont South Atlantic Coast CESU. And this year, in 2018, the Piedmont South Atlantic Coast is undergoing its 5-year review and renewal process to kind of started off in a new 5-year term. It'll be their 4th 5-year term. So each of the units, as it was established, has continued to be active throughout the last 20 years, and we're looking for that to continue into the future. The concept of the program was to establish long-standing partnerships to facilitate collaborative work from at multiple scales on multiple topics. And I think we've seen great success, and we continue to see interest from many parts of the country in terms of adding new partners on a monthly basis. Just an image of the map of the different units, biogeographic units. In the southeast, we have the Gulf Coast, Piedmont South Atlantic, Southern Appalachian Mountains, and South Florida Caribbean. Chesapeake Watershed involved in this meeting, but as you can see from the map, we've got units all across the country. And we also have partners in Canada and Mexico, and we're looking looking at that right now in terms of expanding participation to other entities in our neighboring countries, also in the Caribbean Basin, Pacific Rim, as the missions of the participating agencies lend themselves to cooperative funded projects with partners in different parts of the world. This slide shows the current federal partners. So we have a number of bureaus from Interior, from the Department of Agriculture. We have the Department of Defense, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, and NASA. We've had ongoing conversation with a number of other agencies, and in fact, a couple of other federal agencies, the EPA and the Department of Energy, had been in the program years ago, but have exited. But now we're back in conversation with EPA. Also, recently with FEMA and APHIS at USDA, and some preliminary discussion with the State Department. There are others as well, but these are the ones that have been most active in the last year or so. And I'll come back to this a little bit later. And then in the bottom right, you can see the MOU. So we're now on our 4th Memorandum of Understanding. Those are documents that provide the roles and responsibilities for all the federal agencies and their actions that pertain to the CESU Council. So the general structure of the CESUs, again, perhaps familiar, but it's worthwhile, I think, for those who are maybe new to the system. The council at the top was the governing body for the program. Each of the federal agencies has designated technical representatives at each CESU with regional, in most cases, but also national supervision of those duties stationed or participating technical representatives from the federal agencies. In each CESU, then, we have the CESU based at a host institution with a CESU director and CESU staff. The format can take many different shapes in different CESUs. Each of the CESUs then has federal agencies and other non-federal partners that could be tribes or tribal agencies, state and local agencies, nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, and then of course academic institutions, of which we have from community colleges, tribal colleges, to four-year colleges, master's granting and PhD granting institutions. Each of the CESUs also has, by requirement, a minority serving institution, and across the entire program we have about 50 minority serving institutions. All of those partners are held together within a multi-party 5-year cooperative agreement structure that lays out the terms and conditions, roles and responsibilities of all the partners, and all the provisions that go along with the program, as well as a system-wide reduced indirect cost rate of 17.5% currently. And then at the very bottom is really just examples of where the projects might occur. So within agency jurisdictions or within particular management units in the field, whether those are national wildlife refuges or national parks or national forests, or just other locations pertinent to the different agencies and the types of projects that they're trying to support, typically pertaining to public trust resources, and those can be natural and cultural resources. And then a bit about the program focus areas and strategic objectives. So if you want to think of the program as having 3 main focal areas: research, technical assistance, and education. Projects would fall into one of those categories or possibly all of those categories. It just depends on the project. Sometimes we'll have research projects with an education component, or a technical assistance project that might be some sort of field management application that also has an education interpretation piece along with it, or it's long-term monitoring that informs decisions over time, and that provides data that can be looked at in terms of trend analysis and those sorts of things. So it varies. And then in terms of the strategic objectives, collaboration is key. So we have set up a model here for collaboration between federal agencies and non-federal entities to carry out projects that develop what we call usable knowledge to inform decisions. Innovation, so creating new and innovative ways of partnering, whether that's bringing in new partners that we haven't worked with before, or engaging multiple types of partners on particular projects at multiple scales, developing interesting information products and education. It varies, but the idea is to have an eye for innovation. Generate is this idea of developing the usable knowledge. Our agencies are tasked with having the best available science to inform their decisions, and through the partnerships and projects that are conducted through the CESUs, we see a lot of information developed that can fit that bill, provide that information. And then lastly, evaluate. The idea here is to take a look at what we've been doing and understand the impacts, understand the successes, understand persistent challenges and try to overcome them, and understand where we might be able to grow and expand and have the greatest success and utility as a program over time. So just a few words about coordination and collaboration. We hear a lot about this, and I wanted to just ask the question, why coordinate or integrate or collaborate? So a lot of the large environmental or sometimes social challenges that we're facing these days are not easily solved by one entity. This idea of grand challenges, they're beyond the scope of a single agency to tackle. And in fact, we're interested in identifying some grand challenges that may be focus areas for bringing together multiple agencies and multiple partners. Establishing and maintaining these strong and successful partnerships takes work. Oftentimes it's not fully successful based on a top-down approach or a mandate. It's really built on the individual relationships that may be between field staff and scientists or individual sites. And it's just important to keep that in mind. And the last bullet there is these persistent barriers that exist. So there are limitations on time and travel, human resources. And then we have to deal with constant challenges of stovepipes and what I would call entrenchment. People are used to doing things the way they do them, or they're used to using a certain methodology or data sets in a certain way, or else this notion of that's not my job. So we really have to stay enthusiastic in the face of the challenges of collaboration, because I think in the end the benefits are great. I want to put this slide in just to show that there are many ways to support a project through the CESUs. This might be a one-to-one. So this is, I call this avenues of funding. So we have a sponsoring entity, which in our case is federal agencies, and a recipient entity, which here we have non-federal partners that can be academic institutions, NGOs, state and local agencies, tribes, and so forth. But the idea is that the sponsoring entity provides funding to a non-federal recipient entity, and in this figure we have a one-to-one relationship or a one-to-many, where one agency might fund multiple partners to work on a similar scope of work in different locations. We sometimes have a one-to-one-to-many, which means that there'll be one sponsoring entity to a primary recipient with sub-recipients that assist in the carrying out of a scope of work. Sometimes we have several federal agencies that will fund one entity to carry out work that has application across a wide swath of different federal partners. And then the last one that I call coordinated is where we have multiple sponsoring entities or multiple agencies funding multiple partners, but in a coordinated fashion to tackle a problem at maybe a large landscape scale. So this is one of the areas that I am interested in seeing the program grow. And we do hear a lot about coordinated projects, a lot about large landscape initiatives, but we also hear a lot of folks say that it's very difficult to do that, and I would agree with that. But it's not insurmountable. It takes coordination and a willingness to work on these things in a partner-based approach, where you might have a bundle of resources from each of several agencies to each of several partner entities, and they're all tackling a larger project or larger problem. Each of the different projects then fill in one portion of that grand challenge. The next slide is meant to be a schematic about the way that our host institutions are supported by our multiple federal agencies. I put this in here, one, to show that, but also as an example that it is possible to have multiple agencies funding, providing funding for the furtherance of a particular action. So in this case, each of our federal agencies provide some support funding on an annual basis that is routed then to our host institutions to provide modest support funding to carry out the roles and responsibilities of the host institution. And the way this works is that each of those federal agencies in the program provides funding through the National Park Service, which is where the National Program Office is housed, and the National Program Office, working through the National Park Service, provides cooperative agreements to each of the host institutions to support annual host activities. Now the schematic was existing, and I just overlaid the agency logos on there, so I wouldn't read too much into all of the different layers and arrows. So some example stewardship priorities, science and stewardship priorities, and I know that we were going to hear about a lot more of this later in the morning, so I'm just going to keep this relatively brief. But I did mention earlier landscape scale conservation. This continues to be a priority for most agencies. Multidisciplinary problem solving, so bringing together teams that can tackle a problem that has many moving parts or many different aspects to it, whether those are physical or socioeconomic, cultural, if they're large scale, small scale, it need a team approach. Another priority that continues at each of our agencies is the engagement of youth, trying to support the development of our future environmental professionals and environmental decision makers and managers, and engaging underrepresented populations. So working to the extent that we can to bolster inclusion and diversity within both the management and science community. And then a few of these I've paraphrased from some new priorities identified at the Department of the Interior, but I think several of these cut across to different agencies. But applying science to land, water, and species management, maintaining partnership programs for stewardship, integrating science to inform land use planning processes, using science to inform natural hazards actions, and I'll come back to that in a minute, enhancing understanding of the nature public health nexus, and we have a program called Healthy Parks, Healthy People that sits within National Park Service but has a broader application than that. It's trying to get the population out to public land, certainly, but also just open open space, city parks, get the nation moving, and then understanding what the roles and benefits are for maintaining high quality habitat, high quality water resources, air and environmental integrity for public health purposes. Beyond that, supporting activities within the education area for increasing environmental literacy, working to support development of a savvy science and environmental professional workforce. These are priorities, I think, that cut across the agencies, and I'm hoping we'll hear some more examples coming up from our different partner agencies in a minute. So I wanted to say just a minute about this idea of large landscape projects and also just connectivity. So within this program now, we have over 400 partners from many different organizations. The circles on this slide in particular are more focused on networks themselves, so connecting this network with other networks, and that's one of the points to be made. But also connectivity, meaning the opportunity to connect across CESUs, across institutions, across agencies, across project areas, across disciplines, really taking the initiative to work in a direction towards multi-entity collaboration, if you will. So I'm going to have a couple of examples in a minute, but this is just an example slide for connecting the 4 networked programs within the Department of the Interior. So we have the CESUs, the Cooperative Research Units, the Climate Science Centers, and the LCCs, whose future is uncertain at this point. But the notion here is that these organizations already do work together, and if we can understand how they do and maybe find other opportunities where they can work together to bolster each other's efforts, so complementarity. One program provides information that another program can benefit from, and vice versa. Then take this to another level with our other partner agencies and programs. The idea is that identifying needs, science, research, technical assistance, and capacity building needs, then looking towards production of information or products or training, capacity development approaches that provide service to that, and then delivering this information out to partners, multiple target audiences, to inform decisions or improve decisions, and in so doing, perhaps provide further fodder for stronger partnerships with a wider community of stakeholders in the conservation arena. So this is an example. Several of you have probably seen this before, but we've pulled together a group to look at the Mississippi River Basin. This Mississippi River Basin touches 31 states and 2 provinces in Canada. It's a super region. It encompasses a number of large river systems. It goes into 6 different CESUs, and the opportunity here is envisioned to bring together partners from those different regions to work on problems that occur at this large landscape scale. So understanding social, demographic, and economic changes, landscape changes, persistent environmental issues like drought and other problems, and finding opportunities to work across boundaries. Another example that I'm going to put in here, and I want to thank Ray Albright who put this together, and was really involved in the pioneering work on this. But this is an all hazards incident CSU model, so this would involve the training of partners with respect to the incident command structure, and they would be put on a roster and available to respond in the event of a hazard, to assist with any number of different activities. And I presented this at the Southeast Natural Resource Leadership Group several months ago, and it had the response was great, and there was a lot of interest in this, and especially from FEMA. So I've been talking with FEMA about the opportunity to get FEMA or the Department of Homeland Security into the CESU program. And anyway, I just wanted to mention this as a potential project where multiple entities, here we have National Park Service identified, but it certainly could be involving others, and could be replicated in other parts of the country. And then one other large project I don't have on here is the Southeast Regional Partnership for Planning and Sustainability, SURPASS, that has involved partners within the Gulf Coast CESU and the Piedmont South Atlantic Coast CESU. And that program is looking at the impacts of encroachment and urbanization on military installations and mission readiness activities. But the idea there is a multi-partner program, multiple states, multiple federal agencies, multiple academic institutions, multiple nonprofit organizations to work together to understand the impacts and provide information that can inform decisions in that regard. Well, I'm going to end there, but I do have a couple of other comments, things to bring to your attention. One, we're going to have a national meeting this June, 5th to 7th of June, at the National Conservation Training Center, and we'll have opportunity for folks to call in and participate remotely. And then a couple of things that we're working on is we have a national project database that we're trying to get up online for everyone, working to develop some communications products for not only for our own outreach, but for everyone else's use to help with outreach and awareness building for the program. And then most recently we talked about developing a protocol for identifying highlights of projects where we can have some online, people could input information through a Google form or something of that nature, and photos from projects, and then we can post these on the websites to highlight the great actions and activities and projects that people are carrying out. So with that, I'm happy to field any questions.
Thank you, Tom. That was a great overview, keynote presentation of the structure and functions of the CESU larger national network of CESUs. We don't have time necessarily for questions at this moment, but if you'll put a note in the chat box about the national conference, date and time, and so on, I think people might appreciate that. If you just tuned in, you've joined the Southeast Regional CESU Virtual Conference on collaboration and cooperation in protecting resources and ecosystems. We just heard our opening keynote presentation by Dr. Tom Fish, and we're moving next to our next speaker, which is Ray Albright with the National Park Service. He is a senior scientist, and he oversees the facilities and activities regarding two CESUs, the Southern Appalachian Mountains and the Piedmont South Atlantic Coast. Ray, are you prepared to jump in and take us on for the next presentation? Thank you. You need to press the talk button on the upper left if you're on. Carol, are you on? I think you can serve as backup. We think we show Ray as being joining the session.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. I think Giselle's on. I prefer for her to speak because for some reason I'm getting a lot of feedback on my mic.
Okay, yeah, we can hear that. Giselle, are you on, or can join us? We're still waiting on Ray. If I saw that he signed in. We know we're going to have little technical challenges with people coming on and off, but so we'll be patient. Come on. Yeah, we see your note, Ray.
There we go. I think I'm on now.
All right, good deal.
There we go. Good morning, everybody. Sorry for that technical glitch there. So allow me just to start off by recognizing my co-panelists, Dr. Carol Daniels and Dr. Giselle Moore. And I've got our contact information on the final slide, and there's going to be 9 slides, counting this one. But before we leave the title slide, please note that the National Park Service is a science seeker. Now, we develop a lot of our own usable information, but we also seek a lot of information. We don't really have
All right, we lost you, but we'll stand by.
There we go. I think I'm back on again. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about what kinds of science that we find in the that we seek in the National Park Service, and talk about where the Park Service goes and looks for usable information. And then lastly, we're going to talk just real quickly about money. So the National Park Service is a house divided when it comes to the kinds of science, kinds of usable information that we seek. One half of the agency seeks cultural, historic preservation, museum management kinds of information. And then the other half of the house seeks natural and social sciences kinds of information. And the reason the house is divided is because our funding divides right along that red dashed line. Money doesn't pass between the two halves of the house. And information generally does not pass very well between the two sides of the house. So on the cultural, historic preservation, museum management side of the Park Service, we'd be seeking these kinds of usable information. We seek scholars and specialists and authors and photographers and archivists, for example. We also use very special partnerships that have been established for a long time. Partnerships with heritage programs and tribes and states to not only gain information, but also to share information. On the natural and social side of the Park Service, these are the kinds of usable information that we seek. Information about things that are living, things that are dead, not living, and also about social values, demographics, interpretations. So for the natural and social sciences, we seek researchers, we seek experts, taxonomists, and we rely heavily on technology to gain information. So for both sides of the Park Service, both sides of the house, this slide helps to summarize what kind of usable information that we seek. We look for information that what's on a park, how much is there, what condition it's in, how much will it take to restore it, or does it need restoring? And then in the social sciences, we're looking at the visitor experience, the relevancy of the story of the park to the public. Also, looking for usable information that will help show compliance to legal mandates. So it's very much applied kind of science. But there are at times building stones, very basic science that we seek as well. So let me add one more bullet to this, and that would be information that helps us to preserve unimpaired for future generations. So this table shows the kind of the general sources of information for the Park Service, for both the cultural side of the house and for the natural side of the house. Notice that universities tend to play a larger role for the natural and social resources in providing information, usable information to the Park Service, whereas private companies, state agencies play a larger role providing information for the cultural resources. Of course, a private firm we would not use a CSU agreement for that. But also finally notice that for the natural and social science resources that Park Service has a great advantage of being able to go to a sister federal agency, particularly the USGS, for natural science information. In fact, we go to the USGS for most every one of our hydrology projects. So real quickly, let's talk about some of the money. Most all of the funding for science and information needs in the Park Service come from our own internal funds, money that we've already designated in our budgets for that need, money that will be designated 3 years to 4 years in advance for that need. So in this aspect, the two sides of the Park Service are very similar. Now we do get a trickle of money that comes from private sources. And also we get money from other agencies, but this money has very specific targeted outcomes. For instance, forest health, or water quality, or wildfire, for example. And then once in a blue moon, and maybe more of the frequency of a lunar eclipse, Park Service will get special funding from Congress for a science need. A couple of recent examples of that is climate change. There was some climate change special money that came out for that. And also when Hurricane Sandy went up the East Coast, there was a lot of money that came out of Congress for the restoration. As part of that restoration need, there was a search for usable information towards that restoration. So we do at times get some money out of them, some special money. So what have we said? So we said that first, the Park Service is a science seeker. It's an information seeker. It seeks information along two parallel tracks, one for the cultural side of the house and one for the natural, social side of the house. Two sides of the house use very different sources to get their information. Yet both sides receive most of their funding from internal funds. And at that point, I'm going to turn it back to the moderator, and I don't know if we have any time left for questions or not.
Okay, Ray, this is Tom Doyle. We did have a little bit more time. We don't show any questions, so I'm going to ask people who are on board to use the chat box in the lower left corner of your screen to type any questions you may have. So anyway, if you've just tuned in, we see that folks are joining us en masse, and we appreciate that. This is the Southeast Regional CESU Virtual Conference titled Collaboration and Cooperation in Protecting Resources and Ecosystems. And so we invite you to add your questions there, where Kelly's already put a note as well. We've got a great kickoff from Dr. Tom Fish as the national coordinator, and now we just heard from Dr. Ray Albright at the University of Tennessee with National Park Service presentation of their involvement in the way their funding structures work with regard to CESUs. So I'm actually the next of the speakers, which is a series of federal cooperators that are presenting their association and use, in my case, benefits of CESUs by the U.S. Geological Survey. And so given that there's just a couple of minutes, let me introduce myself as both moderator and speaker. I'm Tom Doyle. I'm the Deputy Director of the USGS Wetland and Aquatic Research Center in Lafayette, Louisiana, formerly the National Wetlands Research Center. And my director, Ken Rice, is in the Gainesville Laboratory, and we're part of the largest ecosystem center in the USGS family of biological laboratories, and we cover most of the area and work of the Southeast region. Ken is a representative of the CESU for the South Florida and Caribbean network, and I am also a representative for the Gulf Coast CESU out of Texas A&M. So we're proud to be part of CSU, and as Ray sort of iterated, USGS is a primary cooperator and collaborator with universities and others on CSU-related projects for sister agencies. So I'm going to be presenting some of our work and start with an overview of the spending budget and program stats of USGS, and only hold myself accountable for what I had to do to sort of put these numbers together based on some spreadsheets from the last 3 years, from FY15 to FY17. And what you should see is that we have approximately 300 university partners and grants that are affect our cooperative agreements that we've entered into in that period of time. It's really a little difficult to sort of put everything into an annual basis, given the fact that some projects are 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, or longer, and so they're floating in and out of these fiscal time frames that I'll be presenting. The total of the dollar commitments involved is somewhere approximate to $33 million. So we have a very significant role in using CSU for advancing science. Approximately 100K is the average grant or cooperative agreement amount, but that varies depending on the project itself and the length of the project and so on. Sort of an upper max of the projects we have is somewhere approaching 500K, and these dollars in these days, 500,000 doesn't buy a lot of research, given the necessarily. I mean, it does, but it goes much with inflation and so on. So it gives you some idea of what USGS's commitment is to using CSUs. Our center, in particular, for a budget year FY16, we were involved in 15 plus CESU agreements with different university entities or NGOs that qualify or that are members of the CESU networks, principally, I would think, Gulf Coast and South Florida Caribbean CS units. And our funding commitment fluctuates, obviously, but in that time period, it roughly was near 750K as it was. So I don't see that changing necessarily, but it fluctuates from year to year, and given some of the budget constraints that we all know about, those relationships could change some, but they're beneficial in a lot of different ways. And so some of the ideas that I've got from those that are using it, they really see the major benefit of fostering specialized capacity and collaboration with our university partners that have special expertise and equipment, technology, reputation in certain fields that encourages us to partner with them, with the CSU as our principal mechanism for doing that. It has some benefits in providing streamlined process. The agreement just processes fast and efficient. It serves a level playing field. We have a same fixed overhead. It sort of negates the competition among universities to flex. They're already flexing with a very accommodating overhead rate at 17.5%. And largely it supports multidisciplinary and integrated science. There's some things that we don't do or do well, or we have special needs that are met by reaching out to our university partners that have those capacities and make for better projects in the process. And that allows us to effectively have the other benefit of working on complex and comprehensive and emerging research questions and needs. So I wanted to give a little time that I thought I might have to go ahead and share a couple examples of our own work, principally that I've already explained that we've merged and are now the larger of the ecosystems mission area programs or laboratories in the U.S. Geological Survey, and we have offices not only in Lafayette and Gainesville, but also in other offices in Florida and Louisiana that serve our other national and state level projects that you might be familiar with. In my case, I had some work that was with the Department of State on a program called Forecast Mekong. This is a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, and we had the special need for some 3D animation products and video production, and also a work to enhance what's called the SWOT model with a graphic visualization tool. SWOT is the Soil, Water, and Assessment tool that is used at a landscape scale to track water or constituents of water through watersheds, and this is a model that's being applied in not only in the U.S. but all over the world, in this case the Mekong River Basin. The added benefits were we had some PhD computer programmers that were from foreign countries. Those are often challenges for us to work with the talent that comes from overseas and goes to our universities, and that in this case they were able to actually facilitate language transition of videos that were produced as part of this work. An example being the virtual River of Life that you see noted at the bottom, and it's produced in different languages: Vietnamese, Laos, and Thai. So we couldn't have done that work without the benefit of our university partner. This is just a graphic of the visualization tool that shows sort of the multi-dimensional capacity or utility of the model, showing the geospatial watersheds of the Mekong Basin and the multi-dimensional data model output input graphic that was quite useful in the process as part of the work. Another product that we did with the help of the CESU was the Sea Level Rise Modeling Handbook, which was a resource guide for coastal managers, engineers, and scientists, which was a very dense, condensed handbook on the data, methods, and models for predicting impacts on coastal ecosystems, but involved a lot of advanced modeling and other data operations that were facilitated by the joint partnership with the university there at the University of Louisiana. And this is just another image in the product, just showing more modern tide gauge information over the period of the satellite record, and so you may want to go and look at that work. We also, as Ray Albright mentioned in his presentation from the National Park Service, Congress on occasion passes out hurricane supplemental funds, which usually means fast and rapid startup, and in some cases challenges the agencies for which the money's shared to staff up quickly and to mobilize and get into the field, particularly post-storm, to capture some of the immediate, data and impacts that can be observed. And so we were able to do the same for a project that was largely facilitated by having the university partnership, and they brought other capacities that we were overtaxed for, things that we can do such as cesium soil dating operations, but they had the same there in the University of Louisiana, and it was very important adjunct of work done between USGS and its university partners. So with that, I'm at the end of my presentation, and we're on the edge of a break. And so I'm going to try to look at the box and see what we have for questions. We have, and this could be, I think, handled by any of the three speakers that we've had previously, Dr. Albright and Dr. Fish and myself. What sort of challenges to sustainable research do you see with the current review of all the monies greater than 1 cent? Are CESUs in danger under this new review process? Hit the talk button. Anyone, Dr. Fisher or Albright, if you'd like to handle that.
They're next after you.
Okay. How are we doing? We still on? We're good on time, are we?
Yeah. You got 4 minutes.
Okay. All right. I'm not sure we're getting anyone to jump in on that question. No worries. All the questions will be sort of handled post conference in an email or on the website, and they will be distributed to certain folks who want to go ahead and try to tackle those specific questions. So hopefully you'll hear back from someone if we fail to cover it in this time. So I'm going to, okay, we have somebody that's on the talk. All right, well, let me reintroduce. We still have people joining us, and I'm sure they will in and out throughout the day. We're working this new technology, and it seems to be pretty well. It's just a little challenging when it comes to transfer of presentations to some degree, but otherwise, if you just tuned in, you've joined the Southeast Regional CESU Virtual Conference. And our theme is collaboration and cooperation in protecting resources and ecosystems. We've just heard an overview keynote presentation by Dr. Fish of the structure and function of the CESU network, presentation by Dr. Ray Albright on the National Park Service role, benefits and challenges in current financial climate and fiscal climate. And I've just completed Dr. Tom Doyle presentation of USGS use and benefits of CESUs that we use heavily and that allow us to bring non-advocacy science to our agency partners and work together with our university collaborators. So I think we're ready to move to our next presentation, which is by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service friends of mine, Dr. Laura Brandt and Dr. John Turpak. Dr. Brandt is a senior wildlife biologist with the Fish and Wildlife Service, and is working on Gulf Coast issues and more. John Turpak is the Gulf of Mexico Science Coordinator for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and so he's currently serving as the Science Coordinator for the Gulf restoration efforts with Fish and Wildlife, within Fish and Wildlife Service. So Laura or John or both, if you'll hit your talk button and let me know that you're on and you're good to get an early start.
Yeah, we're
Let's do it.
good to go here, Tom, if you can hear me.
All right,
Good,
I do.
Good. Well, good morning, and thanks everyone for participating, and thanks to everybody who helped organize this. I know it's been a little challenging for a number of reasons. So John and I have about 15 minutes, and the plan is for me to talk a little bit about overview of Fish and Wildlife Service and outline some of our science information needs in the southeastern United States, and then John's going to talk more specifically about work in the Gulf of Mexico and some potential opportunities there. And then we'll have about 5 minutes for questions, and you can type them in the chat. And so I wanted to back up a little bit and talk a little bit about Fish and Wildlife Service in general, because I've come to realize that folks don't really know what we do within the Fish and Wildlife Service or who we are necessarily. And so we are one of the bureaus within the Department of Interior. We have a national office, which is located in Washington, D.C., which many people may be familiar with because of the association with Congress and the national efforts. But we also have 8 regional offices that are spread throughout the country and cover the entire country. The region that we are in is the Southeastern region, or also known as Region 4. Overall, our mission is to work with others to conserve, protect, and enhance fish, wildlife, and plants, their habitats, for the continuing benefit of the American people. So much like the Park Service, we have a mission to both protect resources and to have them be available for the benefit of future generations as well as our current generations. We do this using strong principles and objectives of using environmental stewardship based on scientific knowledge. We want to use that knowledge to help guide our conservation, and so much as Ray characterized the Park Service as science-seeking, the Fish and Wildlife Service is kind of in the same situation. We have some internal science capacity, but a lot of the work that we need to have done, we seek outside entities to do that, and one of the mechanisms to do that is through the CESU partnerships. We also have programs that their purpose is to provide public opportunities to appreciate our wildlife and our outdoors, and to hopefully improve people's understanding of the importance of the natural environment, and therefore help us ultimately to protect them. So most people, when they think of the Fish and Wildlife Service, they might think of the Endangered Species Act, may or may not think of the over 560, I think this is at 566 now, national wildlife refuges that we have throughout the country. But we also have national fish hatcheries and fish resource offices that help us deal with the aquatic restoration and fishery issues. And then we have our 86 ecological services field stations. And these offices help us to do a variety of things. And as I said, the one that folks are most probably familiar with is the Endangered Species Act. We also have responsibilities for migratory birds in terms of the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, the Duck Stamp Program, and helping to conserve migratory birds, helping to restore some of our significant national fisheries, and then there's a series of grant programs that help to conserve, restore, protect different wetlands, and then there are grants to states to help states with their state wildlife action plans. As I said, we have a strong tradition of science. Rachel Carson was a Fish and Wildlife Service employee, and we within that vein, we want to help to acquire and apply and communicate our science information. We want our service staff to be involved in scientific communities, and we want to have these partnerships with both scientific organizations and folks doing research in science so that we can get the best information to use for our resource needs. And it's also very important for us to promote efforts to grow the next generation of service scientists. And so this is where some of the associations of universities can be very valuable for helping to the universities understand what the needs are within the Fish and Wildlife Service. Within our region, for our Southeast region, we've gone through several exercises trying to outline what our science information needs are so we can get them met better. And we've just got some broad categories here of the things that have risen to the top. We need to be able to monitor and evaluate what we're doing on with our management. Aquatic resources are a big issue, as many of you are probably aware that water resources in general are becoming a bigger and bigger problem in the Southeast, and the critters that rely on that are in jeopardy in some cases. We are particularly now looking at the life history, status, and trends information for what's called our at-risk species. And this is the group of species that has been petitioned for listing by by various folks, and we are in the process of developing what are called species status assessments for those, which collect all the biological information and help the service make a determination on whether or not they should be listed or not. And then we have needs relative to social and sciences and human dimensions, and how then we incorporate the information into decision analysis. And so one of the things that's important is, and Tom mentioned this in the beginning, is developing these partnerships with the folks who can help us to get the science needs met. And so how do you find out who to work with on that? Well, we have a website that has information both on our science within the Southeast, but also importantly, who you can contact. So we have our science committee. You can start there. There's also several links on here that provide you with information on who's doing what in which offices, and that provides you the opportunity to link in and get more detail on what kinds of science needs are being looked for. And John's going to give us an example from the Gulf as to some of the more specific science information needs that they're looking for in that region. So John, you got to press your talk button.
John, you might try unmuting your phone. All right, John, I know you have lots to say, and you can say it fast enough that you can catch up. So we're standing by. We do have a picture of the Deepwater Horizon on screen, which is a monumental environmental event for the Gulf of Mexico and all the partners, including Fish and Wildlife Service and NOAA, are in charge of trust species. So we're hoping you can still join us or figure out how to unmute your phone or get on with this. Laura, I don't know if you want to try to, if you know enough about the presentation to kind of carry it further at this point or not. We have a break on the backside, so I think we can be patient to see how this works out.
So somebody in the chat box said, so I could hear John, but I can't hear John.
The case is his volumes. Oh, okay, I caught a whiff. John? we can barely hear you. If you can turn your volume up. We're having some conflicting information about some who can hear him and some who cannot. From the controls, it looks like he's trying to run his setup wizard. It does give you two options. One is to, or it may give you multiple, but it looks for all the options you may have in terms of speaker capacity to calibrate. So it could be that he's thinking he's supposed to be talking on one instrument, his phone or his computer. I'm not sure.
And I mean, we could flip through the slides without the
well, I've just flipped it
the
for
audio.
you. Yeah, you want to try? All right. This is the
Well,
grand. Let's look at the budget.
Yeah.
I know enough to say that this is big money, and I've run outside to catch it falling from the sky, and my pockets are still empty. But I'm sure it's on its way, as we keep thinking. So, yeah, John
and I
knows
think
this.
This is one of those, those things where there are going to be opportunities that come up under different situations. And going back to what I was saying about, the best way to get engaged with the Fish and Wildlife Service is to develop the partnerships. And to develop the partnerships before some kind of crisis comes up, and which usually is followed by money. And so getting to know the folks at your local National Wildlife Refuge or your local Ecological Services office and having a conversation with them about what you're doing and what their needs are can go a long way to building those relationships so that you're ready when money becomes available.
All right, I just flipped the slide as well. And you think you can handle this one too? There's a number of different pots, and that.
So there's a lot of different resources that are coming available, and down the first column it just gives you an example of some of the funding sources. Each of them has their own geographic scope and criteria and obligations related to it. And the Fish and Wildlife Service has multiple roles within each of those pots of money. And if you look over on the far right column, it talks about whether or not, we're a trustee, a council member, a consultant, administrator, or an advisor. And so the Fish and Wildlife Service is involved with all of these, and again, is looking for getting the best folks involved in those projects to help get the information that we need. Specifically, things that John can talk with you about more are the Restore Council and the services role in that, the NERDA process, the National Resource Damage Assessment process, and the teams that they've set up to work on that through the monitoring and adaptive management. And of course, the services focus is on the natural resources, a lot of the habitat and wildlife restoration kinds of things. So if you contact John, he can give you more information on the programs that he was going to speak about there. John is the technical representative for the Gulf CESU, and I'm the technical representative for the other three in the Southeast. Feel free to contact us, and I think we have 1 minute or a little less for questions. If anybody has anything, you can just type it in the chat, and we can either answer it now or later.
Okay, Laura, that was great. I think you did a fabulous job. John is the go-to person for sure, and so folks will have his contact information if there's something in the presentation they'd like to follow up on. I don't see any extra comments except from John himself. He said he tried everything. John, we know you're a champion, brother. You did all you could. This has been fun. We're trying to, I understand. He sends his regrets. He's a fabulous speaker, so you missed out. If you just tuned in, we're heading into the break, and we've just completed our morning, early part of our morning session, hearing from all of our federal leads or partners on their participation in the CESU networks nationwide effectively, or the Southeast in particular, since this is the Southeast Regional CESU Virtual Conference. So we're going to go to a break time at this point. We're going to reconvene in a matter of 10 minutes, 9:30 Central Time, 8:30 9:30 Eastern Time, thank you. 8:30. I was trying to think too fast there about our time scales, time zones. So just hold on. Don't need to drop off necessarily. Just put your mic down, go grab some coffee or whatever, but come back at 8:30 Central Time, 9:30 Eastern Time. We thank everyone for joining us this morning. We'll continue at that time. Thank you.
Helena, can you do me a favor? Can you please use your teleconference line that you called in on just to run a sound test, if you can? Sherry, could you also try to speak right now as a sound test?
Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
Okay, good deal.
Thank you. Is that Helena?
If we're on the teleconference, will Al be able to advance the slides on the blackboard himself, or will y'all have to do it for him?
If you want to test that yourself right now, I can't remember if we put you through the training and you know how to do that or not, but
No.
there are little left and right arrows. Okay, so feel free to just say next slide, and I'll bring your slides forward one at a time.
Okay, I'll tell Al.
Okay.
I wasn't supposed to be here today, so that's why, but I ended up being able to come.
Okay. And Sherry, just keep in mind, I think I tried to communicate this to you, because your slides from the Department of Defense have a specific background. They did not load up along with all the others, so I'll be loading them separately for about 30 seconds prior to the first time you see one of your slides show up, so just be patient.
Okay, no problem. I was wondering what you meant by that. Okay, now I understand.
And Melanie Demoir, if you can hear me, the same situation was true with your slides. You had a custom background that's sort of owned by your organization, I think. And so I'm going to be loading yours up separate from everyone else's at the end of the session. So around 11 o'clock, just be patient while I do that. It takes me about 30 seconds to bring that up.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Can you just let us know when it's complete? And
you will know because you will see your startup slide appear on the screen.
Fine.
Sorry
Gotcha.
for the interruption,
okay,
everyone.
No problem. Hello?
We'll be getting started again in 2 minutes. Hello again. My name is Kelly McCarter. I'm speaking to you from North Carolina State University on behalf of the forestrywebinars.net, the webinar portal for forestry and natural resources provided by NC State University and the Southern Regional Extension Forestry Office at the University of Georgia in Athens. We're about to get started again, but before we do, I wanted to provide you with a little bit of basic information. Remember that in the chat window in the lower left-hand corner, we intend for that to be used as a way to state your questions, and these are recorded so that if the speaker does not have time to respond during their presentation, you will have the opportunity to have further contact with them, as they will have your questions and be able to respond to you by email or through the website, where we're going to post information after today's program is over with. For those of you who are participating to get continuing education credits, remember that at the end of the program you will be redirected automatically to a survey and then 5 quiz questions that pertain to the presentations this morning. You answer those questions all correctly, and you will receive continuing education credits that you have requested. Just make sure that when you see the little checkbox that says, I certify that I did participate, make sure you check that, because even if you scored correct on all the quiz questions, without checking that, you still won't get your CFE certificate. And by the way, that does come automatically in email, usually within a few hours of finishing your participation in the webinar. So now I'm going to ask that all of the presenters remember to keep your microphones muted until it's your turn to speak, and to use the chat window or the moderator tab in the chat window if you need to have communication with us on the side or privately. And again, if there are any questions, please do put them in the chat window so that we can respond to them either live or after the speaker is done. So now I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Thomas Doyle, who is our morning session moderator, and he will go over with you the contents for the rest of this session and how we will proceed. Thank you.
Okay, now it's working. All right, thank you, Kelly. If you just tuned in, I'm Dr. Tom Doyle. I'm the session moderator for this morning's federal partner session, and you've joined the Southeast Regional CESU virtual conference. The thematic theme for this conference is collaboration and cooperation in protecting resources and ecosystems. We've already had a lineup of speakers this morning that included an overview or keynote presentation by Dr. Tom Fish, explaining sort of the structure and function of the CESU network on a national scale, and he's the national coordinator for CESUs. Offered a great presentation. We then heard from Dr. Ray Albright as a representative from the National Park Service and their work and success in using CSUs as well, in administering CSUs. And then myself representing the U.S. Geological Survey and providing some perspective of how USGS uses CSU and to what degree in terms of dollars and also the benefits in terms of the benefits of collaborations, the enlarged capacities and needs that we can meet for integrated science. And then we heard from the Fish and Wildlife Service pair, Dr. Laura Brandt and John Turpak, about Fish and Wildlife Service use and partnership with CESUs. So we allowed some time for the CESU committee, maybe longer than was necessary to get beyond this point, but we're going to soon start with our next part of our session at 9:45 or a little bit early perhaps, to give speakers an extra time. We're dealing with a few technical glitches of getting folks online. We hope that we're settling in. It seems to be working pretty well for the most part. Are there any folks that have access to talk that are part of the CESU planning committee for this conference that would like to jump in and say any words of welcome or introduction? Okay, we're also don't see that Sonny Snyder from NOAA, who is our next speaker, is actually online. Sonny, can you confirm that you or your proxy is on board?
Hi, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Tell me who you are.
Hi, this is Sonny
Okay.
Snyder with the NOAA Fisheries Southeast Fisheries Science Center.
Okay, great. Okay. All right. So Sonny, we got a few more minutes, unless you'd like to, have a little broader, time frame to work from. We can probably get started if you'd like. We know that some have talks with a lot of slides, but we think they're going to cover them in their allotted space. We haven't had questions, so most speakers have been able to use all of the time available.
I'm happy to get started now, or wait a little bit. It's
okay.
Totally
okay. Yeah, we're a few minutes early, but I think people that were planning to join us would do so. We've already had a break this morning, so let me introduce Dr. Sonny Snyder, Chief of Staff for the NOAA Fisheries Southeast Fisheries Science Center. The presentation will focus on fostering opportunities for research partnerships between NOAA Fisheries and CSU members in the Southeast region. Thank you, Sonny.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for the opportunity to present and talk about potential research opportunities. I want to note that I am the acting technical representative for the South Florida, Caribbean, Gulf Coast, and Piedmont South Atlantic CESUs. And we've also got online listening in our NOAA CESU program manager, Jennifer Lechuga, and she contributed greatly to this presentation, so I'd like to just say thanks to her and let you all know that she's on the line too. So I just wanted to start out giving you a kind of introduction to NOAA. I'm guessing that some of you are familiar with our organization and maybe others not so much, so we'll just do a quick intro to NOAA. Our mission is science, service, and stewardship. Our science is to understand and predict changes in climate, weather, oceans, and coasts. Of course, we want to share that knowledge and information with others, and we want to conserve and manage coastal and marine ecosystems and resources. We have 6 line offices. We, of course, have our NOAA headquarters, and then we have the National Environmental Satellite Data and Information Service, which we call NEDDIS. We have NOAA Fisheries, which is my line office, the National Marine Fisheries Service, the Ocean Service, the Weather Service, which when I introduce that, when I say I work for NOAA, I always say, like the Weather Service. So most people are familiar with NOAA through that line office. We also have our Office of Marine and Aviation Operations, which is our uniformed line office. Those are the folks that drive our ships and drive our airplanes and things like that. And we also have our Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. So that's one of our big research arms. And you can see that the Fisheries Service, Ocean, Weather, and Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research, those line offices are in bold, and I think those are the line offices that are most highly associated with the CESU. So I'm on slide 3. I forgot to tell you that I think you're advancing my slides, so I'm now on the 3rd slide. Is that right? Are the slides getting advanced? I just wanted to check.
Yeah, I just advanced it. It's now on an introduction, NOAA's involvement in CSUs. That's the 3rd slide.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'll help you with that.
I'll remember to say that from now on.
Okay.
Thank you. So in 2009, NOAA joined per a NOAA Fisheries initiative, and we are a member of 10 out of the 17 CESUs. And of course, this presentation will focus on the 4 here in the Southeast and the Chesapeake watershed. Next slide. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the broad NOAA research priorities and provide you a link to where you could dig into those a little bit more deeply if you wanted to. We are, of course, focused on collecting environmental observations, using those environmental observations and predictions to make decisions. Some of our priorities, research priorities, include ecological forecasting, including water prediction, and research on the Arctic. And you can dig into those research more broadly. Dig into those research priorities using the link below. But as I go further in the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit more about some areas for our National Marine Sanctuaries program and for NOAA Fisheries. But I just wanted you to have this sort of broad resource of NOAA research priorities available. So I'm going on to the next slide. And here we'd like to flag a couple of research priorities of the National Marine Sanctuary System. So for the South Florida and Caribbean CESU, in that area is the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary. And the focuses of the South Florida and Caribbean of the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary is climate change, coral reef management, habitat protection and management, marine zone effectiveness, physical oceanography, finfish population dynamics, and water quality. And of course, we've provided some links where you can dig into those research priorities if there's something that, an area and something that you might be interested in. I'll give an example of habitat protection and management and coral reef management. The Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary includes about 1,400 square kilometers of coral reefs and other coral or distinct habitats. Human activities, of course, like boat and ship groundings, the accumulation of marine debris, improper anchoring cause a lot of physical damage to our reefs. There's lots of anthropogenic and natural stresses that are affecting our reef-building corals and associated organisms. The collective effects of these different damages and stressors are resulting in decreases in coral cover, decreases in species diversity, increases in coral diseases and coral bleaching in the sanctuary. So that's an area where the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary is really working on research and trying to drive a lot of understanding of the population dynamics of these different reef-building species and how climate change and fishing pressure and habitat loss are going to be realized over the next 3 decades. For the Gulf Coast, similarly, we have the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary that's located out of Galveston, Texas. And here, the research priorities are biomass removal, coral and sponge disease, habitat characterization. There's a socioeconomic component to this sanctuary, and of course, water quality. I'm going to move on to the next slide. In the Piedmont and South Atlantic CESU, there's the Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary, and that's located out of Savannah, Georgia. And at this sanctuary, you can see the research focus here of acoustic impacts to resources, benthic pelagic coupling, biodiversity, climate change, habitat change, invasive species. So I'll talk a little bit about the acoustic impacts to resources. When you have increased human activity in coastal waters, it produces a lot more anthropogenic noise in the marine environment. And lots of marine animals, including marine mammals, some fish and invertebrates, use a lot of sound to communicate, to navigate, to feed, and this research is focused on understanding how anthropogenic noise impacts the sound cues used by these marine organisms. And so the impacts to the resources in the Grays Reef National Marine Sanctuary due to underwater noise are a focus of attention and research in this sanctuary. Also in the Piedmont and South Atlantic CESU and the Chesapeake Watershed CESU is the Monitor National Marine Sanctuary, and that's located out of Newport News, Virginia. And here, again, some similar research priorities: invasive species, marine debris, some public engagement and communication and outreach priority here, and the human dimensions. And just wanted to flag that underneath each of these, we've included links to those sanctuaries so that you can find more information on those sanctuaries and their research priorities. All right, next slide. All right, so I just talked a little bit about the National Marine Sanctuaries and those that are located in the Southeast Region CESUs. And that's, as I mentioned, we had 6 line offices. That's from the National Ocean Service. So, the National Marine Sanctuaries is in our National Ocean Service. So we're going to move to one of our other line offices and talk a little bit about NOAA fisheries. I'm going to talk to you kind of from the NOAA Fisheries Southeast Region perspective, and I'll bring in a little bit of the Chesapeake Bay and the Greater Atlantic region as well. I am at the Southeast Fisheries Science Center I'm located at our headquarters in Miami, Florida, but our jurisdiction runs from North Carolina to Texas. That includes the U.S. Caribbean and highly migratory species in the Atlantic. We have 3 fishery management councils in our jurisdiction: the Gulf of Mexico Fishery Management Council, the Caribbean Fishery Management Council, and the South Atlantic Fishery Management Council. We also work with the International Commission for the Conservation of Atlantic Tunas. And I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with the fishery management councils, but they're truly the backbone of fisheries governance in the United States. These organizations include all stakeholders: federal managers and scientists, academic scientists, state agencies, NGOs, fishermen, private citizens, business owners. This is a really incredible kind of self-managing body for fisheries management in the U.S. And we work with the fishery management councils on understanding their needs for management, their needs for scientific research, and making recommendations and working with all of those entities to manage fisheries. You can, of course, you can see their websites online, and they also have research and management priorities. For NOAA Fisheries, we are working under several congressional mandates. I'm going to highlight here that we're working under the Endangered Species Act, the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and of course the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act. And usually when I usually am like ESA, MMPA, and MSA, and I just reminded myself to not do that today. So I'll try not to do that as I continue to talk. So we also have a Northeast region and Greater Atlantic region, and we work through those regions. We work in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. The Chesapeake Bay watershed is covered by our Northeast Fisheries Science Center, our NOAA Chesapeake Bay office, and the Greater Atlantic Regional Office. And I highlight those offices just as again, a way that you could search those offices and find out more about what's going on our website if you are interested in the work of those offices. And again, for NOAA Fisheries, all three of those offices will be working under the Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act, and Magnuson-Stevens Conservation and Management Act. The NOAA Chesapeake Bay office is also a part of the Chesapeake Bay program and Chesapeake Bay agreement. So that's just another mandate and program that is guiding the work of that particular office. So next slide. So I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into the NOAA Fisheries priorities. We've recently released our 2018 strategic goals and priorities. And the two primary goals that I think would drive potential collaborations with the CESUs are maximizing fishing opportunities while ensuring the sustainability of those fisheries and the fishing communities, and to recover and conserve protected species, so those that would be protected under the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, while supporting that responsible fishing and resource development. There's a link to our guidance. Like I said, it was just released early this year, so that's something out there if you want to dig a little bit deeper. On the next slide, I'm going to talk about some of those priorities that are listed in that document under maximizing fishing opportunities while ensuring the sustainability of fisheries in those communities. Here are some examples of those research priorities, because I think this is the area where you might find interest in developing research collaborations with the offices that I mentioned that are working in this region. First, I wanted to mention our ecosystem-based fisheries management work. That's the first bullet there. We are working on developing research into ecosystem-based fisheries management. I think that's one of the areas in the Southeast that is ripe for developing we also have a lot of recreational fishing here in the Southeast, so that's one of our priority research areas. Aquaculture is definitely one of the NOAA Fisheries priorities that we're building at this point in time. We're always wanting to maintain and enhance our stock assessments. Those are the assessments that support the management of our U.S. fisheries, and we're working in close coordination with those regional fishery management councils that I mentioned earlier. Research that supports the continued development and improvement of stock assessments.
This is exceptional isolation.
So I just wanted to flag that someone may not be on mute. We're also, of course, here in the South, advancing electronic technologies, so how we collect our data. You know, in the past we've used reporting, you know, handwritten logbooks and things like that. So we're looking at developing the technologies that allow fishermen to report on catch using various types of electronic technologies. We're also, I wanted to flag the last bullet, which is implementing regional action in support of our climate science strategy. All of our regions, so both the Southeast Fisheries Science Center and the Northeast Fisheries Science Center have developed climate science regional action plans. And those are available. If you want to look into those a little bit more deeply and you have trouble finding them, of course you can reach out to me or Jen Lechuga. Our contact information is at the end of this presentation, and you are welcome to reach out. They are available online, and so those climate regional action plans are sort of laying out our plans and our needs for climate science research in the Southeast region and in the greater Atlantic region. So I think that those regional action plans are a great thing to look at in terms of the types of climate science that we're interested in NOAA fisheries. Let's move on to the next slide. I wanted to talk a little bit about our protected species priorities. We would like to reduce the negative impacts of human activities on protected species by really developing that scientific understanding or new guidance and tools. We're improving the quality of our protected species stock assessments. So just like with our fisheries management, we are looking at the population size and population dynamics of protected species in the region. We want to, of course, look at the impacts of climate on protected species and habitats, and you will, within the climate science regional action plans that I mentioned, you will see both fisheries and protected species research priorities laid out in those plans. And if we're continuing to develop long-term restoration programs in partnership with trustees to restore marine mammals and sea turtles affected by the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. So next slide. Just a couple of ways that CESU partners can collaborate with NOAA.
Yeah, 30 seconds.
For Southeast and Chesapeake Bay CESUs, I don't think there have been any projects to date, so we're really interested in building some collaborations with the CESUs. On the next slide, you'll see contact information for myself, for Jennifer Lechuga, our program manager, and for our NOAA CESU lead, Dr. Cisco Werner. You could contact myself or Jen and work with us to set up maybe a meeting if you have an idea or you want to discuss a research idea. We're happy to hear that and see if we can facilitate something. We also find a couple of ways that you can search for NOAA funding opportunities. I went to grants.gov and I searched on NOAA. And for example, right now there is
we're running over.
FYE 28 Chesapeake Bay Fisheries Research Program that closes in late April. So I wanted to flag that one. So it's a good place to find all of the NOAA grant opportunities. And then the NOAA Fisheries Funding Opportunities webpage is also linked here.
Sonny, why don't you,
right now,
let me interrupt. Let me interrupt. We're out of time, but why don't you enter some of that information at the web contact in the chat box, and people will find it there, and it'll be available.
I'm not on the tab box, but it's in the presentation.
I see. Okay. Well, good. Thank you very much, Sunny. That was awesome. We need to move on to our next presentation by our federal partners with the Department of Defense. We have Alfred Cofrancisco and Sherry Whitaker joining us. Okay, but we do need a minute or two to load up slides. Hold on a second. What's that? Okay. Yeah, we do have some people going over us. Al is a technical director with the civil engineering programs. Okay. All right. All right. We're trying to set up the next talk. It's going to take a minute or two to load it up. So, Al, stand by. Sonny, do you want to come back and sort of finish what I cut you off from sharing with the group about NOAA funding opportunities?
Opportunities webpage. And for example, I just wanted to let you know that I found that the bycatch reduction in engineering program funding opportunity is available right now. That is for, I mentioned developing new technologies, understanding, if you, bycatches, you go out fishing for one species and you catch some others that you didn't mean to, and so a lot of those get released back into the environment and maybe don't survive, depending on, we don't really know. How many survive, how many die after being caught. So understanding post-release mortality. So, I just wanted to flag that that's an opportunity that's out there and is one of our priorities, and that website is where you can go to look for those opportunities. And then the last side, again, is just contact information. The one I haven't mentioned is Dr. John Hare, and he is the NOAA technical representative for the Chesapeake Bay, or for the Chesapeake watershed. His email address is there as well, and we're just really looking forward to trying to build up our partnerships with the CESUs.
All right, thank you, Sunny, for that presentation. Let's see, we may have a question or two that I'm looking at. We're having a little bit of an issue just getting the Department of Defense presentation uploaded. Someone asked, is there a standardized way that all federal agencies partners alert the CS units about available opportunities? Or is it best just to regularly check the partners' websites for opportunities? Maybe that's not a question just for you alone, but what ways does NOAA post these funding opportunities?
Yeah, I don't know if I can answer that for everyone or how the CESUs do that, but all of our funding opportunities are posted on the web, and typically they are associated with websites. So I showed you the NOAA Fisheries Funding Opportunities webpage, but those pages are out there for all of our different line offices, but that grants.gov is where all of them are posted together. So
right.
Those are
good point.
Yeah. And so you could search on a federal agency, so you could put in NOAA, you could put in another agency and find out what funding opportunities are available pretty easily that way.
Right, thank you. Yeah, I think that's the best answer, grants.gov. We're getting close. We're going to be ready to go to our next presentations from our Department of Defense partners. And just give us a minute more to get that set up. Thank you for your patience. If you just tuned in, you're joined the Southeast Regional CESU virtual conference, and our theme is collaboration and cooperation in protecting resources and ecosystems. If during the presentations you have any questions, please add those into the chat box, and if we have time, we'll allow. Otherwise, I think we're about ready to start our presentation. Let's see. Okay, that's all I got. Okay, so
if you're having a problem with you showed my second slide just a minute ago. If you're having a problem with the first slide,
yeah, Al,
skip it.
Okay, we're good. If we can go from there, and if you want to introduce Sherry, please do so. Thank you.
Well, yeah. My name is Al Francesco. I'm with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Vicksburg, Mississippi, at the Engineer Research and Development Center, and Sherry Whitaker is here to hear the presentation and help answer some questions at the end here. The first slide was just a title slide saying who I was and who I worked for. This slide, I put this in to showcase that the Corps of Engineers is composed of 9 divisions, 8 of which are in the United States, and they're divided up into probably about 36 districts. You can see there the various boundaries and the areas of responsibility. The divisions are really based upon drainages, basically water drainages, and that is one of the key roles of the Corps of Engineers is water resource as a water resource agency. What I'm going to talk about today is our civil works activity. The Corps has 2 hats. We work in civil works and we work in military. But Sherry and I only deal with the civil works dollars. So it's kind of funny, but the other Department of Defense agencies will handle any military dollars we have for our military research projects. Even though we do military research also here on station, we keep the dollars separate. So I believe the next speaker, whatever, has those responsibilities. So we would work our military dollars through them. So basically, in the civil works activities, we have 3 main areas of focus. We have our navigation issues, we have environmental issues, and then we have flood risk management issues. And in that arena, we will do work in any one of those particular areas. So down at the end, I give some examples of the various research projects that we funded. So we'll carry on with that in just a minute. But okay, the next slide, please. Okay, as everyone knows, it's a cooperative agreement that we enter into with the various universities or NGOs. When we signed the agreement, I think back in 2006, Mr. Stockton at our headquarters signed it, allowing us to join. And what happened, what occurred there was that the Engineer Research and Development Center, which I'm a member of, and we do research for all of the districts within the Corps of Engineers, wanted to enter into 3 regions, the Gulf Coast, the Great Rivers, and the Great Lakes. We filed and entered into it. The Jacksonville district wanted to enter into the Florida Caribbean. And based upon legal or lawyers' discussions, we found out that the districts, our individual districts, do not have authority to enter into cooperative agreements. So initially, ERDIC, the Engineering Research and Development Center, is somebody not on mute? It's really, anyway, sorry. ERDIC is the only organization that can enter into these particular agreements. And so initially, what we were doing is, we have about 2,100 researchers here on station, and those were the only individuals that were actually using the CESU initially. After that, we developed a protocol whereby all our districts can utilize it now, but they have to go through a central location through us here at ERDIC. So we're sort of like a funnel for all of the research activities that go on or that would interact with the districts. So we keep track of it in 2 different ways, and I'll show you that in just a minute. That allowed us to expand, and so currently we're a member of all the 5 regions that are represented here in this rally, but we're actually a member of 16 of the 17 regions throughout the United States. So this gives us a very broad scope and allow to focus on a lot of different activities. Next, please. I think we missed a slide.
Well, apologies, Al. We had to kind of reload your presentation in a different way, but
well,
sorry about that.
We'll see when it comes out.
Hey, I know you can handle it.
All right. Well, what I was going to tell you was, well, this shows some of the information too. This shows 7 years of funding that we've put together. Now, the green line, starting in 2011, about $1 million, is the research activities that researchers here on our station, or we have various locations throughout the United States, utilize to fund research. So that's a level of funding that we had that we started out with. So it was pretty low at that time frame. But if you look at the blue line above that, at the same time frame, our districts throughout the United States were utilizing it quite effectively, and we're almost at $6 million worth of projects that they were funding. So over the course of time, with various activities that occur, things like the Florida Everglades restoration, the Great Lakes restoration, the Chesapeake Bay, or other areas like that, we see different districts or divisions needing these services, and that's where it fluctuates. So why don't let me see. So again, the impetus really is the Corps has 3 major business lines: navigation, flood risk management, and environment. Environmental restoration in particular. And we do, on an average, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 billion worth of environmental restoration throughout the United States annually. So there's a plethora of activities that are being done by various districts, everything from small projects to the restoration activities on the Everglades, or now we're having a very large activity in the LA basin doing ecosystem restoration of the LA River. So those are the particular activities that are there. So why don't you go to the next slide and we'll see which one comes up.
You there, Al?
Yeah.
Do you see it?
Do you have any other slides?
Okay. Well, it's interesting because
well, we missed we missed a few in here.
Well, they don't show up on they show up on the main frame. So keep going. Sorry for the interruption.
Wait a minute. So did you see another slide looking at the districts that are utilizing it? What I wanted to do is give emphasis to the fact.
Districts utilizing.
Do other people see it?
Yeah, I see the districts utilizing the CESU program by FY from 11 to 17.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody on the phone or in the webcast can see it. I can't myself. Anyway, what I wanted to point out was that there are a number of districts in the area of responsibility for the various regions that are represented at this rally: Galveston, Jacksonville, our Mississippi Valley Division, MVD, Savannah, and Wilmington, all of which in FY17 had research activities going on and were utilizing the CESU. So I wanted to make you aware of the, some of the magnitudes that we're seeing in some of the areas of emphasis. This is just our districts that are utilizing it. In addition, that's not shown on this slide that I can't see anyway, was researchers here at the Engineer Research and Development Center worked with the University of Maryland and other entities in the various CESU, the 5 areas that are covered in the rally, to do other research projects themselves. So just wanted to sort of give you an idea and let everybody see that there's a wide-ranging number of our districts are utilizing. I think we've had at the most somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 to 20 of the 36 districts that are utilizing the CESU throughout the United States. Okay, on to the Portland district. I put this in here to just to give you examples of some of the types of studies that we were conducting. Looking at fish monitoring on the Columbia River system, looking at salmonids, looking at reservoir water quality evaluation and studies. So what we're seeing a lot is our districts need to have a lot of their environmental activities, et cetera, monitored, getting information from them, and then on a very consistent basis. Our center here in Vicksburg, while we do travel quite a bit and we do work in all of our divisions, can't be there on that regular basis. And this offers a great opportunity for universities and NGOs to help do the monitoring, conduct studies that need to be intensely monitored on a local area, and be able to provide information back to the districts that they use in evaluating their ecosystem restoration projects, or how navigation is complying with some of the dredging regulations, et cetera. So those are things I wanted to point out. Let's see what slide we come up with next. We'll play a game here. Oh, okay, the Jacksonville District, South Florida Caribbean. These are some of our major projects that we have with them, and some of the larger ones, working on the apple snail, an invasive species, but also one that seems to be very critical now for the threatened and endangered Everglades kite. So wading bird colonies, size, location, timing, and the conservation area of the Everglades National Park, demographic movements and habitat studies of endangered snail kite. So you can see a lot of these are research projects or research activities that require a lot of intensive management or activities. Universities have some great labor forces in graduate students, which help them develop their research that will give a master's or PhD degrees, and will provide us with a lot of information to document the activities that are going on with the restoration activities or flood management, risk management activities that we're doing. Okay, next slide. Let's see if we get to the Savannah. Yeah, we did. Okay, again, just some other examples of research type projects that we're doing, looking at physical, chemical, biological impacts to the Savannah Harbor project, looking at the Savannah estuarine area and the wetlands that are adjacent to that, monitoring, say, calcium levels in bird species and their tissues, to look at the expansion of the project and how it's going to go. And also, sort of a unique one here, we actually got into the conservation of artifacts in conjunction with the Savannah Harbor project. They found the Confederate ship, I believe the Georgia, excuse me, that's Activity, and the artifacts are being pulled up and labeled and conserved with the proper processes. I don't have any other slides that I had in sequence, but some of my other ones may pop up if you go to another one. If not, I'm more than happy to answer questions. Oh, yeah, okay. ERDIC activities, water resource. These are activities that I'm sorry, I didn't realize we had this. That are being supported by for our researchers here on station. You can see we're working on threatened and endangered species, the sturgeon work. Also, one of the big research activities, which is centered right now in California, is atmospheric rivers. Working with Scripps Institute on that to investigate the impacts of atmospheric rivers. So we do a lot of wide-ranging activities. And then I do think that's my last slide. Questions?
Okay, Al, thank you very much. I don't see any specific questions in the chat box at the moment. I apologize that some of the formatting of the slides in your presentation for some reason were not compatible with the software upload or display in this particular package. I know that could be a little annoying. Yeah, it's mostly just the tables that had some of your dollars, and so we appreciate that. I think for the most part, people appreciate the kind of work and the spread of work that the Corps of Engineers group in ERDIC and elsewhere are involved in doing with CESU. So we thank you for your presentation. We thank all the federal partners that have chosen to participate today to help grow our appreciation for their use and support of CSUs, including Department of Defense. So thank you for that. We apologize for some of the gaps and hiccups of the technology, but it's my first experience. But good thing I'm here in the control center. You'd have to appreciate what Kelly McCarter has done to actually set up this whole session and
well, no problem. We had looked forward to this. Yeah, we had looked forward to this meeting. We had hoped that we could have done it face to face. I think sometimes, especially with a large group, we could have interacted better. One shot, lunches, etc., and outside in the hallway also help in collaborative work. So next time you guys do this, you might think about being able to. I know you tried to do it, pull it together, and it didn't work out. So
yeah, thank you, Al.
So keep trying.
We did end up with some questions, but we're also behind time. So, okay, now we're saying maybe we don't have a next speaker. Is that Doris Washington's not on line?
I am on. I'm here. I just was not able to upload my slides. We don't have the software on our computer.
Okay, but since you're on, I can do your slides for everybody if you kind of know what your presentation is, so we can move to that if you'd like. Our next presentation.
I didn't have.
What's that?
I don't have any slides. We weren't able to do the software on our computer, so I didn't send them.
Oh, okay. I thought we. Okay. All right. We at least had a title slide for you. So if you'd like to
okay, thank you.
Introduce yourself and sort of give us an encapsulation of USDA and Natural Resources Conservation Service activity with CESUs, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you. Again, my name is Doris Washington. I'm the director of our National Water Management Center, but I also serve as the technical representative for the National CESU Coordination. Currently, since about 2009, which is when I actually stepped into the role as the liaison for NRCS, we've serviced about totally 485 agreements, and that equals to about $80.8 million is what we've contributed so far to all of the CESUs across the board. And specifically in the South Florida region this year, we're showing just one agreement, but in the past we have had 3. And the amount that we spent just recently with you guys is $100,000 with the University of Puerto Rico. We are one of the legacy members of the CESU network. We've worked with Tom and his staff for quite some time. This is an opportunity for NRCS to do some non-competitive agreements through the CESU unit that allows us to do some things that we couldn't normally do at our own centers, meaning there is some research work that is being done across the CESU network for our agency, and this is a way for us to be able to do that. So a lot of our scientists, a lot of our soil scientists, agronomists actively engage in the CESU program each year to be able to extend their technical expertise across the various areas. So that's pretty much my presentation update, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have it.
All right, thank you, Doris. I don't see any questions necessarily. Can you speak to the kind of the variety of work that NRCS uses the CESU for in any kind of general or specific manner?
R-D-Y-C-T-E-R.
Sure. We generally use it for, like I said, as I mentioned before, scientists, resource managers, and students. We have used it anywhere from, I'm pulling up the sheet now. Just to give you an idea. We've used it on the chicken population response to USDA Farm Bill practices. We've used it for sagebrush habitat and rural community health. We've used it for soil biological properties. We've used it for conservation evaluation. So there's a number of different ways that we've used it. And then we've also used it to help with assistance for students, such as in the Navajo tribes. We've supported that. We've also supported other outreach activities with various universities for limited and resource minority farmers. So it's really a wide range of things that we do, pretty much anything that we're not able to do for ourselves, and we can contract that through one of the CESU networks. We look to do that.
Okay, so it's more than just research. It's a lot of communication, outreach, and other activities that have to do with effective program management. We have one question about NRCS undergoing reorganization. Can you address that and how it might affect your agreements with CESUs nationwide or even in the
Sure.
Southeast?
Sure. We are under reorganization that has been initiated by Secretary Perdue. We are entering into what they're deeming a one federal government, meaning that all of the sister agencies such as NRCS, Farm Services Agency, Rural Development, and Risk Management Agency, we will all be operating off of a similar platform, meaning anywhere from a one-stop shopping website for landowners and farmers to be able to click on USDA Gov, and it will bring up information for all agencies that are listed. NRCS specifically has undergone a mission change at the departmental level. We were in the natural resources mission area, which now they have separated NRCS, FSA, and risk management under the Farm and Conservation Program area, which is a new area. We have a new undersecretary, and we are undergoing a transformation of going to one administrative platform for all three agencies. So all of our contracting, financial management, human resources, property and procurement will all be done by this one particular group, and they will be reporting directly to the department. As far as CESUs are concerned, as an agency, we will see no change in how this program is being managed at this time. I have not been told of anything differently. We still will remain non-competitive agreements that we're able to enter into, and we still will be managing and operating the same for now.
Okay, thank you, Doris, for that presentation. That brings us really back to almost our scheduled start. For those that have joined us in midstream, you've joined the Southeast Regional CSU Virtual Conference, and we are in a morning session having heard from a number of federal partner agencies that work with CESUs. We started with the national coordinator, gave the brief keynote of an overview of the structure and function of CESU network. And we've heard from the National Park Service, USGS, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, I might skip somebody here, apologies, NOAA, Department of Defense, and now National NRCS in USDA. So we move to our next presentation by Rachel Novak, who is the Bureau of Indian Affairs Climate Science Coordinator. Rachel, if you're on, hit the talk button, and I think we've got your first slide set up if you'd like to go. Okay, Rachel, up in your upper left corner, you'll see a little screen, and below it says talk and video. If you hit on the talk button, it should give you, okay, I think you're...
Hi, can you hear me? Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, great. Sorry, it was down in my computer. I was listening on the phone as well, but I just turned that off because it was getting some feedback. Okay, so all right, I'll start. So if I want to advance, I just go up here to the arrow button at the top right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, great, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. As mentioned, my name is Rachel Novak. I'm the Tribal Resilience Coordinator for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, so slight change in title. So I'm going to go over today our organization generally and talk about some ways that folks can potentially engage with tribes in the region. And I do want to caveat it by saying I am the Tribal Resilience Coordinator, so I know my program best. Obviously, I've been with BIA for about 3 years. I came from EPA 2 years ago, and so I know my program the best, but my program did join 14 of the 17 CESUs on behalf of the entire BIA. So we're trying to slowly get the word out to the rest of the BIA about this opportunity, and there has been interest slowly trickling in over the last couple of years. So we hope that continues, and that some of the reach can be externally as well from partners that know the BIA is a part of this, who might work with my colleagues in the regions. So I'll let you know a bit more about the BIA. In general, our mission is to enhance the quality of life, promote economic opportunity, carry out responsibility to protect and improve trust assets of American Indians, Indian tribes, and Alaska Natives. And so we're organized as a central office here in Washington, D.C., where I work. And within BIA, we have trust services where I sit, which is really natural resource focused, and land focused, real estate focused as well. Justice services and social services. And we have 12 regional offices, and you can find more about that on our website there. But I do have a map showing that. Oops, that was my very first slide. Oh. Okay, yeah, this is great. So these are our 12 BIA regions. The region I think that you guys are more interested in right now is the Eastern region. It extends all the way from Florida to Maine, so it's our largest region. But as most of you probably know, we don't have the same concentration of tribes as perhaps like in the Western region or the Southwest region. So this region is very large. It services, go to the next slide. Was servicing 29 tribes, supporting them. And recently, as some of you know, we had 6 additions to this region in Virginia because 6 tribes from Virginia received federal recognition in January. So the regional office is in Nashville, Tennessee for Eastern, and so it's now serving 35 tribes, and those are broken out into agencies. So right now there's the Eastern Cherokee, Choctaw, and Seminole agencies, and in the southeast, where I think that folks on the phone are more interested in, there are of course agencies in New York servicing Maine and New York tribes, and there may be a new one to service the Virginia tribes as well. So I have some general goals here from the Eastern region in terms of the strategic objectives. And they're pretty high level, so protecting tribal and individual Indian natural, cultural, and heritage resources, managing resources to promote responsible use, and a sustainable dynamic economy, providing economic and cultural opportunities for Indian countries, safeguarding property, financial assets, advancing scientific knowledge, improving quality of life for Indian communities served, and empowering the Eastern regional workforce to be highly skilled, functionally integrated, and results-oriented. So, like I said, pretty high level there, but I did want to mention them since they're focused on the Eastern region. And I wanted to get a little bit more specific, and these are in terms of the Southeast, and in particular Florida here. So this is a snapshot of some of the priorities provided from our Eastern region and from the folks there that are working with some of the Florida tribes. So here's an example with Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, which has some rights in Florida, the original homeland areas, the Seminole tribe of Florida, and the Mississippi tribe of Florida. The highest concerns are the water quality in Everglades, invasive species, and unique species. And we do fund tribes in southern Florida with the water program support and provide grants for water management and agriculture and native species. And our main hydrologist that is supporting tribes here is Lindsay Rawlings, or Leonard Rawlings, and his contact info is there if there's more interest in this area. But this, like I said, is just an example of some of the priorities. And so, move to our next slide. And just backing up here a little bit in a way, but focusing more on my program in particular, because the previous slides were kind of more general. So my program is a tribal resilience program, a work-young program in VA. We started back in 2011 as a very small program, and then in 2014 we really got kind of the funding to become more of a full-fledged program that has funding to support tribes and tribal awards. And so we've become much more kind of mature and stable since 2014. And the focus of the program since then has really been on planning, training, and trying to help develop more technical capacity and information. And so the bulk of our awards to tribes have been focused on planning and trying to help tribes access training and also become trainers for their regions as well. And that is really kind of where we started. We don't focus on implementation at this point. The idea is to focus on the planning end so that folks can incorporate climate and resilience components into their existing plans, so that can kind of get integrated into the programmatic plans and the implementation of those, and the monitoring, reevaluation, etc. So that's where our focus has really been on, in the planning and capacity building. And so we joined on behalf of VIA 14 of the 17 CESUs a couple of years ago, and we've been had a very good experience so far. Of course, with working with the different partners and with the benefits of being a partner. But we actually haven't worked very much in the Southeast, and so part of that is just communication. But I think I'm hoping that some of our external partners, potential external partners, can also help get the word out as well. Right now, I'm kind of a program of one, so I really think that the partnership is beneficial for all of VIA, but it's hard, kind of as one person to really get the word out. So I'm hoping that some of this information can be used by our potential external partners to let tribes and even BIA folks you might know become more engaged in this partnership, so we can really help benefit tribes in Indian country. So a bit more about our program. We focus on ocean and, well, we have had in the past competitive funding focused on ocean and coastal management planning. There is a congressional mandate for us to spend $2 million of our program funds each year on that, and that's probably of interest since in the Southeast, most of our tribes in there are coastal or near coast. Training and travel has also been an area focused, a focus area of our funding, and then, like I mentioned, the adaptation planning, vulnerability assessments, information, supplemental monitoring. And I already mentioned we're partners in 14 of the 17. We might become partners in another CESU soon because of the addition of the 6 new federally recognized tribes in Virginia, and we aren't members up there yet of the Piedmont CESU. So, like I mentioned earlier, the whole emphasis kind of us joining our program was to help tribes access the expertise that these research institutions that are partners, especially in terms of this competitive award funding that we've had in the past. But any BIA program can use this partnership, and a few are starting to. So we hope that continues. So I have, just the last couple slides here, have some advice and information for potential partners. And first on top of the list there is to get to know the tribal resilience activities and priorities. We have a tribal resilience liaison in the Northeast and the Southeast at the Climate Science Center, and I'll talk a little bit more about him in the next slide. And then we also have a tool, which is an interactive tribal resilience actions map that is new. We developed it for the 4th National Climate Assessment because we're one of the we're the federal coordinating lead author on that, working with a team of great authors to develop that, and this is one of the products that came out of that. So we hope that that's really useful in seeing what's going on, and if folks need background and some education about what activities are going on with regard to resilience and adaptation in the region. And also, of course, as advice, I would say to let your tribes, or let tribes in your region, in your state, in your region, well, in the Southeast, where most of you are located, know about your expertise, and of course this opportunity to partner with BIA through the CESU partnership. But we're rather new here still, so it would be helpful getting the word out through multiple avenues. And I mentioned I was going to say something about the Tribal Resilience Liaison. We have Mr. Casey Thornbrew. He's our Tribal Resilience Liaison for the entire East Coast here. He is generally located up in Amherst, Massachusetts, at the Northeast Climate Science Center, but he also is down at the Southeast Climate Science Center somewhat regularly as well, and serves and works with all the tribes in the region. He started last year, and so he's working his way to try to make contact with all the tribes in the region, and he was brought on through our partnership with the United Southern and Eastern Tribes. And they're in Nashville. So he's in the Southeast fairly regularly, and he's a great contact to get to know what a lot of the priorities in the region are with tribes. And this is the map that I was mentioning. There's the website where you can access it. It's semi-final. It's something of a living document. So as more activities are identified or initiated, we can add them to this list. And provide kind of a high-level description and a link for more information. but this is going to be part of the National Climate Assessment, but it's currently available at this web address. And it's interactive, so you can click on them and find the different summaries as well. So this is my last slide of content. Just remember, tribes do drive decisions on whether or not to fund research projects for sovereign nations, and BIA is a trust responsibility. So the advice is to learn about tribal priorities and try to get the word out again. Let partners know about your expertise and the opportunity to partner with tribes through BIA's CESU partnership. All right, thank you very much, and feel free to contact me if you have questions.
Yeah,
or via Regional Climate Contact, Harold Peterson.
So thank you, Rachel. That was a great presentation. This is Tom Doyle. I did have one question about recognized tribes in Louisiana, and I think you kind of answered it toward the end. But I also met Casey Thornburg here in Raleigh, where I was doubling up on conferences. He's here for the Southeast Climate Science Center, and we hope he'll get around because he's got a great presentation, and he's going to be a great liaison for the purpose of the work he's doing, and I hope people get to meet him. So let me see if there's any other questions in the pool. We've got maybe a minute that we can spare before we move to our next presentation. How can we partner with BIA if you're not a member of our CESU? This is probably a university partner.
So we joined all CESUs where we have federally recognized tribes. I know in some areas where we weren't quite partners yet, or our partnership hadn't gone through kind of the cycle of that particular CESU, we've looked for overlapping CESUs where we are partners, where we can still work with those universities. But I'm not sure which CESU is mentioned here, because we are partners in the Gulf Coast, southern Florida, and we probably, in the Great Rivers, we'll probably be looking at partnership in several of those to overlap in Virginia because of the 6 new federally organized tribes. But I know several of the institutions are partners in more than one CESU, so I would check there first. And if it's kind of those 3 that we hadn't participated in yet, like Chesapeake, the Southern Appalachians, or the Piedmont, we may very well be joining those soon because of the potential for tribes in Virginia.
And maybe North Carolina. Okay, well, great. Thank you. I think Casey's one of the primary contacts. People might need to get his information, yours as well, to follow up. Thank you for that. We're going to move on to our next presentation by Sean McDougall. He's the Biological Science Program Lead for Bureau of Land Management, Eastern States. Sean, are you online?
Hey, Tom.
Yeah, you got work the talk button up near the upper left. Okay, I think you're good.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Turn your volume up a little bit.
All right, 1 second.
Just above your talk button.
How's that?
Well, it could be better, I think. But I can hear you. So.
Okay. I could switch to a headset if that would be easier.
Now just speak up a little bit, maybe.
Okay.
If you know where your mic is.
All right, I'll use my theater voice. Okay, well, thank you, Tom, for the introduction. I'm, as you mentioned, the lead biologist for the Bureau of Land Management Eastern States Office. And today I'm going to provide an overview of Eastern States' participation in cooperative ecosystem studies units and some areas where we anticipate future research needs and partnership opportunities. Next slide. So Eastern States encompasses the 31 states east of the Mississippi River. We're responsible responsible for the management and oversight of approximately 40.3 million acres of subsurface federal mineral estate. This includes oil and gas leasing and development and the production of solid minerals such as copper, lead, zinc, gold, quartz. We administer leasing for coal in places like Kentucky and phosphate mining in Florida.
People want to still hear you speak up. Your volume's still too low.
Okay, is that any better?
A little, yeah.
All right. Shoot. I can try to switch to a headset, see if that helps.
No, that's you're working there. Just you got to keep it, sustain it.
Okay. So in addition to the subsurface mineral estate, we manage roughly 10,000 acres of surface lands across 13 states for multiple use management. Some interesting facts of Bureau of Land Management in the East. 14% of the oil and gas produced in the eastern United States comes from Bureau of Land Management administered leases. In 2017, our oil and gas lease sales generated $6 million. In that same year, we generated $1.4 million in royalties from the development of solid minerals, and we produced 289,000 tons of coal. Next slide. Public access and recreation is a priority for Bureau of Land Management's multiple use mandate. And in eastern states, we offer a variety of recreational opportunities, as you can see here on the slide. For example, in Florida, we have our Jupiter Inlet Lighthouse Outstanding Natural Area, or ONA, which offers an incredibly diverse array of habitats in 120 acres, supporting 450 cataloged species of plants and animals within one of the most densely populated places in the country. It's located at the confluence of the Loxahatchee and Indian Rivers, about 1.5 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, and it's been a strategic site for human occupation for about 5,000 years. The ONA was designated by Congress primarily to protect its unique scenic, scientific, educational, and recreational values, and because of its unique location and conservation mandate, we're invested in habitat restoration and the recovery of federally listed species within the area, while providing access to the historic grounds, the lighthouse, fishing, and other recreational opportunities. So it's a really good model of, in a small area, a microcosm of what BLM does. The ONA has been a really interesting test case in terms of balancing intensive management right next to areas where we're using assisted natural processes for conserving remnant habitats that are rapidly disappearing in Florida. Next slide. So eastern states is pretty unique. We don't have the landmass of the western states, places like Nevada or Utah, but the lands that we do manage are spread across a very large percentage of the country, kind of like what BIA just mentioned in the last presentation. The geographic extent of our region provides an opportunity for us to be engaged with a really diverse array of partners. Eastern States is a member of 7 of the cooperative ecosystem units in the eastern United States, with the exception of the North Atlantic coast. And go to the next slide. And Eastern States is involved in the CESUs that we're focusing on here for this workshop as well. We've worked extensively with the Chesapeake watershed over the years, and recently we've been increasing our presence in working with Florida Atlantic University at Jupiter Inlet on different projects. On a national level, BLM has funded projects through the Gulf Coast and the Piedmont CESU to deal with national level issues such as fertility treatments for managing populations of wild horses and burro. And the wide range of issues that we have in the Bureau of Land Management and again, that large landscape gives us a lot of potential for new projects and opportunities. Next slide. One of the big drivers for future research and partnership opportunities is going to stem from the Southeastern States Resource Management Plan. We're going to be analyzing key issues and looking at supporting decisions that will guide the management of a 6-state area in the East, looking at allocations and best management practices that we can use to achieve our major goals and objectives for a variety of resources. The current draft EIS focuses on our surface tracts, which are identified there in stars, as well as where we have federal mineral interest in Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, Louisiana, and Florida. The planning area includes 3,000 acres of public surface lands, as well as 1 million acres of mineral estate, ranging from split estate with private landowners to minerals where we have either state ownership on the surface or other federal agencies. And the intent of the plan is to facilitate the adoption of surface management direction from other agencies, and coordinate with them on how we're going to be managing mineral interests over the long haul. The draft was initiated in 2009 and was based on information that was collected back in 2007, and it was published for public comment in 2014. But with the changes in the administration and with feedback that we've gotten from the release of the draft, we're looking at a variety of different issues, such as advances in hydraulic fracturing and drilling technology, and re-examining some of our earlier proposals and taking a look at current conditions to make sure that we can use best available information to guide future leasing and development decisions. Next slide. So for the surface tracts, I mentioned before that the Jupiter Inlet ONA is the only congressionally designated unit of the BLM's conservation land system east of the Mississippi River. And because of its mandate for preservation and public access, that's driving planning level decisions that will be important for guiding its future management. Fire is, for example, a key ecosystem process benefiting oak scrub and sandpine communities in coastal Florida. Frequent fires are important for maintaining sand patches and preventing the succession of hardwood hammock and reducing competition from palmetto in the understory, and preserving these scrub habitats, which are important for some of Florida's most threatened and endangered species, such as gopher tortoises, Florida scrub jay, southeastern beach mouse, and the eastern indigo snake. But as you can imagine, prescribed burning within very affluent and densely populated communities has been met with some resistance because of smoke and air quality impacts. So we're looking at exploring best management practices for using prescribed fire and identifying alternative methods that can serve as a surrogate for fire to be able to benefit those different plant communities and meet the species habitat needs within that 120-acre ONA. Another example is looking at the use of green infrastructure, such as living shoreline principles, to stabilize our shoreline at the ONA through modifications of the Loxahatchee and Indian rivers. Through the intercoastal waterway, we've seen, about 70 feet of erosion on our shoreline there, and we have Johnson seagrass beds, which are very unique in that area that we're trying to preserve. So we're trying to figure out how we can use different plantings and techniques that are going to provide habitat, but also try to prevent boat wake action and other types of erosive forces from continuing that loss of those sandy slopes. And then also looking at how we're going to be able to best provide a high quality user experience and maintaining the values of the ONA, where you have these competing interests on such a very short space. In places like our Meadowood Special Recreation Management Area in Virginia, we're working with Virginia Tech right now on a forest composition study and looking at how we can do habitat enhancement to benefit wildlife and species composition. And that's going to be important for looking at what kind of practices and end results we want to have in that area. And then we're also looking at a large number of species that are candidates for listing or currently listed under Endangered Species Act to come up with recovery strategies and habitat improvement projects that are going to be able to benefit these species in the long haul. Next slide. In addition to kind of the site-based planning decisions, we're going to be looking at landscapes as well. Recently, Secretary Zinke released Secretarial Order 3362 to address big game management and migration corridors in the West. And as you can see on the slide to the left, obviously the West has a lot more opportunities for looking at migration corridors, but in the eastern part of the United States, we have really important opportunities and a need to protect fragmented habitats and providing pathways for species to be able to adjust to changes in climate and be able to facilitate their migration routes. And a big chunk of that is going to be how we coordinate with different surface management agencies and private landowners to include these conservation principles and be able to preserve those pathways. Next slide. So for the federal mineral estate, mineral use development is an important part of the Bureau of Land Management's multiple use mandate. Mining and oil and gas development provides jobs, economic opportunities, and important commodities that are important to maintain our quality of life. Although most people recognize the 248 million acres of BLM surface in the West, there's 700 million acres of subsurface minerals across the country. And our resource management plan is going to be looking at a variety of different issues for guiding our future mineral development needs. As I mentioned, the baseline data for the draft EIS was done in 2007, and with respects to the socioeconomic review, a lot has changed in those last 10 years. So we're going to need to do fresh updates on how the impacts of oil and gas development in those communities have changed in the past 10 years and what are the reasonably foreseeable developments in the future, and be able to project how we're going to develop that subsequently. We're looking at how we are going to address the number of abandoned and orphaned oil and gas wells, and also looking at developing best management practices for reclaiming abandoned sites and plugging wells that are no longer in production. One of the key issues is going to be how we manage the disposal of waste and the protection of groundwater and surface water So we're looking at different best management practices and policies to help us in that respect. And then also taking a look at the impacts of oil and gas emissions and air quality in these communities and areas where we see high potential for oil and gas development in the future. Next slide. And you can pass this slide. Oh, pass the slide. One more. Okay. And so if you have any questions, I'd be happy to take any, I guess, in the minute or so that we got left.
All right. I didn't, thank you, Sean, for that presentation. We're going to have a little bit of pause so we can take a few calls. We're going to be a couple minutes off on our start for the next presentation. So I wanted to ask or understand BLM's management to a greater degree. I guess there's a Western states component similar to yours, or is it broken differently? And then as far as monitoring or the concept of best management practices, is there a monitoring and research component to BLM work?
Yeah, absolutely. So to the first question, BLM's broken up into different state offices. Eastern states encompasses a very large region, that 31 state footprint that I mentioned. So we're unique in having a very large state office compared to, geographically speaking, compared to other states. But, we're considered a state office the same way that California or Alaska, has a state office. And with respect to monitoring, there's a variety of different protocols that we're doing, both from the conservation side, such as the use of a new system called the AIM system for inventory and monitoring, where we're looking at plant community cover to inform land use plan management decisions, as well as decisions from site level issues such as the effects of grazing on allotments, or assessing the success of revegetation from reclamation, but then also doing different monitoring protocols for riparian areas using PFC and other types of protocols. So it depends on the resource.
I think we got a minute or less to try another question. We have one. How many MPS units have BLM subsurface rights?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, there are places where, on Fish and Wildlife Refuges, on some of the National Park Service units, certainly, Forest Service, we have split estates and we have minerals interests that, are either owned by the feds or in some cases, depending on the history of how that property was acquired, there may still be private mineral interests below federal property. And so it's really a case-by-case basis.
Okay.
But it does create a really complex challenge for us when, making mineral management decisions.
I got it. Okay. Well, thank you, Sean. We appreciate that. We're going to move on to our next presentation, which is by Melanie Demure, and she's a marine archaeologist and the environmental studies coordinator for the Bureau of Ocean and Energy Management, Gulf of Mexico Region Office in New Orleans, Louisiana. Melanie, are you on board? Go ahead and press the talk button if you can see it up your upper left corner, and you can begin your presentation as soon as you're ready. Okay, try now.
I'm only on the teleconference line. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you. We can hear you now. Can you hear us?
Good.
All right.
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, sorry about that. I'm able to see the Blackboard Collaborate screen, but I got a nasty finger-wagging notification from our firewall. It's blocked.
All right, well, you got the challenge to speak up as well. So if you had a volume control, or you can put it out a little stronger, people will want to hear from you. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm on my cell phone and I've taken it off speaker. Can you hear me okay?
That's better. That's great. Thank you.
Better? Okay, perfect. So, yeah, so a little bit of technical difficulties here this morning. I apologize for that. I'm going to use the time allotted to introduce our program. If there's any questions at the end and there's time available, I'll certainly be willing to answer them. If not, my very last slide includes my email address as well as our URL, and I can also type those into the chat. So if anything comes up and people want to ask me questions, not a problem. So, like Tom said, I'm with the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I am based in our Gulf of Mexico region. BOEM is one of the Department of the Interior agencies, and with our sister agency, the Bureau of Safety and Environmental Enforcement, we are responsible for managing oil and gas, renewable energy, and marine minerals activity in federal waters on the Outer Continental Shelf, and our jurisdiction goes from the state-federal boundary out to 200 nautical miles in the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and off the coast of Alaska and Hawaii. So in total, that gives us about 1.7 billion with a B acres of submerged bottomland that we have to manage. So it's quite a bit. Our environmental studies program was enacted through Section 20 of the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. Our program began in 1973, and our responsibility expanded through the Energy Policy Act of 2005, which gave us the Renewable Energy Authority as well. So our environmental studies program has a robust data set, especially in the Gulf, for more than 40 years now. So we have quite a bit of information to share. All of our study reports are posted online, so if you want to find a study from 1978, you certainly can. Our studies program was established to provide the information that our Bureau decision makers need to assess and manage any impacts on the coastal, marine, and human environments. So this even includes coastal waters and communities along the shoreline. Our studies are also used to predict impacts on marine biota from acute or chronic pollution events, whether they're low level or large spills like Deepwater Horizon. But we also use this information to monitor the human, marine, and coastal environments so that we can acquire time series data sets and identify trends of any changes in the environment that occur because of our regulated activities. Next slide, please. Thank you. So a lot of our scientific research questions come from information that we anticipate we're going to need for future lease sales, plans submitted by industry, as well as the permit reviews, the environmental reviews that we conduct. You all may be familiar with the draft proposed program that was released in January. This covers potential oil and gas activities in federal waters from fiscal years 2019 to 2024. So that's really where we begin thinking about what our future information needs may be. Now, if we can go to the next slide, please. There we go. So you may be familiar with the draft proposed program. It basically cast a very wide net. The Secretary of the Interior proposed opening up pretty much all of the offshore areas to potential oil and gas drilling. And over time, through stakeholder engagement with other federal agencies, state and local agencies, as well as the general public, NGOs, industry, and a number of other stakeholders, that net can actually be narrowed quite a bit. So I'm sure you all heard the news recently that the state of Florida was taken off the table. Other states may also be taken off the table. So we're very early in the process. And what the Secretary ultimately decides to do for oil and gas offshore is going to be, again, based on the stakeholder information. So stay tuned. Our studies program is very adaptive and nimble, and so we can, while we anticipate future needs, we can also look towards funding studies for ideas that come up very suddenly. So we try and be as flexible as possible. Next slide, please. So the information needs that we have generally fall under these 5 areas, so especially the effects of impacting activities. We really need to understand what the effects of oil and gas, renewable energy, and marine minerals extraction do on the environment. And this is not only natural resources, but it includes cultural resources as well. Under the second bullet, we also want to understand what are the affected resources within a particular area. So our studies program has conducted a lot of baseline studies in the Atlantic, Pacific, Gulf, and Alaska areas, going back again to the 1970s and 80s. We've also funded a lot of long-term monitoring studies. One of our biggest successes, one of our longest projects, is working with NOAA through the Flower Garden Banks National Marine Sanctuary. And for decades now, we've been looking at the impacts of an oil and gas platform that was installed decades ago, but it's within the sanctuary boundaries. So that's something we've been looking at for a long time. And that also helps us address cumulative impacts. So we want to understand what are the long-term impacts of oil and gas development offshore. And again, because the Gulf of Mexico has been such a robust area for development for generations now, we actually have quite a bit of information over the last 40 years, and a lot of that was actually very useful during the Deepwater Horizon response. Lastly, our studies also inform compliance activities. So when we review permits to drill or install pipelines, we can assign what are called mitigations, and these are basically conditions of
off there. So
I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yeah, but we can hear you. We're just going to have to fight for someone that's not on mute.
Okay, I'll do my best. So, for example, if we receive a plan for a permit to drill offshore, we will look at that, and if, for example, a historic shipwreck is within that area of potential effect, a mitigation we can apply would require the industry not conduct any seafloor disturbing activities within the area around that particular historic shipwreck. So on the compliance side, our sister agency, BSEE, will handle any sort of penalties or other compliance issues that may result as someone didn't what they were supposed to do. So our environmental studies will also inform us on the effectiveness of our mitigation. So if we need to consider new mitigations or if old ones are no longer effective, we can revise them. So that's where our studies program is really handy, down in the trenches with the day-to-day permitting activities. Next slide, please. So in terms of topical areas, our environmental studies program also casts a very wide net. We have to include things like fish and fisheries, habitats, coral reefs, protected species, marine mammals, but also air quality, water quality, socioeconomics, space use conflicts with other federal agencies, fishing grounds for fishermen, we have to consider that, cultural resources along the shoreline as well as offshore, but we also conduct a lot of oil spill modeling, and our oil spill risk analysis is a critical piece of our leasing program, so we need to understand if there is a spill in a particular area. What does the modeling tell us that might be the potential trajectory of oil, such as the loop current in the Gulf could certainly drive a lot of that movement of oil. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at upcoming information needs, a lot of the ideas for new environmental studies come from in-house, from our scientists. But we also issue what are called note to stakeholders, where we solicit ideas from the general public, NGOs, or anyone who's on the mailing list, and we consider those ideas as potential future studies. But any ideas for studies that we consider have to fall under at least one, if not more, of these strategic science questions. First and foremost is how can we best assess cumulative effects? So if we're looking at long-term monitoring type studies, Deepwater Horizon obviously is a very important one for us. But also looking at the acute and chronic effects of our regulated activities, broad scale on marine species as well as the environment. But we also have a key component that looks at the human environment as well. So we want to know what impacts might be on local fishing communities or any other coastal communities that might be affected by vessel traffic associated with offshore oil and gas. The effects of habitat and landscape alteration on our ecological and cultural resources is another important question that we ask. Air emissions is a huge one, and pretty much every year we have a new air quality study coming about because obviously it's a huge concern offshore as well as onshore. Some of our physical oceanography studies address the sixth question, which is how will future ocean dynamics amplify or mask the effects of our activities. This is a good example is the loop current and loop current eddies, and how might they drive any surface oil spills. And last but certainly not least is what are the best resources for efficient data collection and long-term monitoring? Are there particular species that are located within a certain leasing area that may not be in other areas? And do we need to key in on monitoring those particular environmental impacts? Next slide, please. So when we take all of these potential information needs into consideration, we publish what is called our Studies Development Plan, and we are currently working on the fiscal year 19 to 21 Studies Plan. These are all posted on our website, and I encourage everyone to go take a look at what we project our future information needs might be. And it covers, again, oil and gas, renewable energy, as well as marine minerals. It doesn't necessarily mean that all of the studies that are listed will be funding, because, of course, like everybody else, we have to deal with budgets and budget cuts and other information needs that might pop up after this document was published. So again, check it out, and you'll be able to get to it from my very last slide, which has the web address. Next slide, please. So just to start summarizing, our environmental studies program covers the biological, physical, and social sciences. We are strongly engaged in monitoring the environment to provide us with our time series data so that we can see how the environment has changed over time. This will be especially important in more frontier areas like the Atlantic, where there really isn't any oil and gas activity, but there's a lot of renewable energy activity that is just starting to kick off. Lastly, Deepwater Horizon is a huge information need for us here in the Gulf. We try very hard not to duplicate any studies that were conducted by MERIDA or through the Gulf of Mexico Research Initiative. So, we try and fill information needs that our agency has that other research consortia haven't necessarily addressed, and especially for us, that includes submerged cultural resources, so historic shipwrecks. That's one study that we looked at for Deepwater Horizon impacts. Next slide, please. There we go. Okay, so for marine minerals extraction, what that mainly entails is coastal restoration and beach renourishment. So think Hurricane Sandy along the Atlantic seaboard. There are quite a few OCS, outer shelf sand resources, but it's a finite resource. So we're really still trying to get a handle on where exactly those sand sources are located, as well as what the impacts are of removing that sand from offshore and putting it on the beach. So marine minerals continues to be an information need for us, looking at long-term impacts. And so that's a topic that continues to pop up from year to year. Next slide, please. And then renewable energy. So this is really starting to take off in the Atlantic region. I'm sure you all have heard about the Block Island wind farm. That's the first one that has been installed in the Atlantic. The Pacific region is also interested in exploring renewable energy options, especially off the coasts of Washington and Oregon, and even Hawaii to some extent. But even in the Gulf, we're starting to hear some interest in looking at the feasibility of renewable energy in the Gulf. So stay tuned. Next slide, please. So our environmental studies program really relies heavily on partnerships that we build among other federal agencies, our academic partners, private sector companies, as well as NGOs. But industry is also a partner from time to time, where their information needs merge with ours. Our studies program is an applied science program, and it is used specifically for decision making. So any studies that we fund must be related to, again, oil and gas, marine minerals, or renewable energy. We don't fund science just for the sake of funding science. But another goal of ours is to outreach and educate the public on our program, as well as the science that we've collected over generations now, and just make sure that people are better aware of what we've done in the past. And then next slide, I believe that's my last. Okay, so there's my email address. If anyone has any questions or want to reach out to me for anything more information on how to get on our mail list, I'm happy to respond. The bottom link right there, the www.bohm.gov/studies, that will bring you to our main environmental studies program page, and that also will give you links to where our environmental studies are posted online. There should be information on how to get on one of our mailing lists so that you can get the email blast when we solicit new ideas. And our studies development plan is posted on there as well. So that's all I have.
Thank you, Melanie. That was great presentation. It also has some of the best pictures in there that we're all appreciating. We do have one question about under your slide about strategic science questions. It states that BOEM will support approved OCS methods in the context of human health. Can you explain or expand on what is meant by approved OCS methods?
I think that has to do with a lot of the permitting that we're involved in has to do with maintaining certain levels of, like, say, for example, air quality, that certain gases can't be over a certain percentage, things like that. That's more of our social science realm, and I think that has to do with what types of gases or anything could affect coastal communities. But I can actually talk to one of our scientists for more information.
Great. Well, there'll be an opportunity when this is pushed out for people to get some specific questions like that, or to have an opportunity to answer them again. But I want to thank you and all the other federal partners for their participation in our morning session. This concludes the federal session, where we've all gotten a great introduction to the different agencies and the level at which they are using or interacting with CESUs, and at least providing all the partners with some idea on how to crosstalk and communicate with one another about our different programs and activities and funding opportunities that are coming up. So if you've just joined or you came in the middle, you've been part of the Southeast Regional CESU Virtual Conference, and so I'm going to invite anyone that's on the rally committee, if they'd like to jump in and say a few words of welcome or that sort of thing. Otherwise, I'm going to be turning this back over to Kelly McCarter, who's going to close out the session with the information for those who are online to get CESU or whatever credits, CEU credits. This does end the morning session, but the technical session that will restart this afternoon will be at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, 1 p.m. Central Time. Do we have anybody else online that has moderator status as part of the CESU committee that would like to add a few words?
Tom, I would like to say a few things to thank folks for their participation. This is Gary Blank from NC State. I've worked with a lot of federal agencies, and have had the honor to work on projects involving endangered species. A lot of NEPA work. And I know how difficult it is balance agency what do I want to say? Agency directive with environmental protection. And I appreciate the work that you do.
All right, thank you, Gary. We were getting a little echo feedback that people caught, but I heard the message. So anyone else have some comments or questions that they want to offer before we proceed with closing out the morning session? Helene, we can't hear you. I know you're trying to jump in there, and we want you to.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can. Sure, go ahead.
Oh, great. Thank you, Tom. I'd like to thank everyone. In particular, I have a list of individuals. I'd like to thank all the speakers for the time taken, both during the practice sessions and during the actual delivery. The information that was provided is extremely valuable to those of us in academia and in NGOs who are trying to interface with the federal agencies in identifying ways in which we can collaborate and provide a contribution. I also wanted to thank Tom Fish. Thank you so much for the plenary session and for explaining the CESU. Tom, thank you for moderating. You did a great job and got us through all the technical difficulties really very easily. I also want to thank Kelly for incredible efforts on putting this all together with all of the training sessions and logistics. I'd like to thank Marion McCord for the support through the North Carolina State University to facilitate this particular session. So again, it's mainly words of gratitude.
Well appreciated. Thank you very much. Do we have anybody else before Kelly kind of closes out with the continuing education credit quiz and instructions? All right. I think you still got a minute to push that talk button. I see a lot of thanks. We appreciate that. I think we made it pretty well. Given the challenges. This is my first time for a virtual conference, but actually I thought it kind of went smoothly in spite of the little glitches of parts, but we've learned a lot. And so Kelly, thank you again. As Helena said, you've done the lion's share of work to pull this off, so we really appreciate it. We think the afternoon section ought to probably go smoother. It's all lined up. So if you'll take it from here for those who need that information to get there.
Okay, thank you very much, Tom, and all of the people you see who are moderators today. What you don't get to see is all the hard work in the background that many of these people and others who couldn't be on this morning have put in an attempt to hold this conference in a literal sense instead of virtual sense. And that effort started in 2016. So these people have put in a lot of hours for which they probably get little or no recognition. So I recognize your commitment, and I'm very grateful to have been part of it. Okay, now it's time for me to take care of the basic housekeeping of people who need continuing education credits. I just want to remind you that in order to get your credits, you're going to have to follow the instructions that appear shortly on your screen that are needed to get your quiz, your satisfaction survey, your proof that you attended, and be able to receive your continuing education certificate by email. So if you are not a person interested in continuing education, feel free to sign off at this point, and we hope you will come back for the 2 o'clock session, which you will find listed as the afternoon session in the Forestry Webinars portal. And for our presenters and other moderators, we'll see you this afternoon through the link that you've been sent in order to get in directly as speakers. Thank you very much to those who attended, and hold on now, and I'm going to push out the information on how to take the quiz. All right, we are done.
So you actually put in your email. Yep. Not qualified. Do I need one? Do I need it?
Do you collect CFPs?
No. I was going to try it just so I get more versed in technology.
I realized that what I was doing wrong.
Yeah,
I was on my phone and I was on
the computer. Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of had to
turned off my
security to tell you. The complaints were to me over. I mean, I don't know what everybody else is saying. I don't think I muted it anymore.
I do this so often, I hear through all of it. I don't even think about it anymore.
It doesn't recognize my email.
So, are you going to be able to teach your classes? I mean, what's going on?
I got the Duo reinstalled. It was just, if for some reason every once in a while Duo just goes away.
Do you have an iPhone?
Yeah.
I wonder if iOS updates from Apple sometimes scramble the eggs.
Yeah, I think that what happens is when you get, no, it's not an iPhone, it's an Android, but if I get an update or if I do, you know, if anything else changes, then Duo